I'd like to call to order this regular meeting of the Boulder Valley Board of Education for today, February 27th. Laura, would you please call the roll?
Benford. Here. Hugla. Here. Garcia. Here. Gebhardt. Here.
Marquis.
Here.
Myers.
Here.
Sargent.
Here.
Okay, please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like to remind everybody that the mission of the Boulder Valley School District is to create challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning opportunities so that all children thrive and are prepared for successful, civically engaged lives. Good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. Our first item this evening is the superintendent's report. Dr. Stevenson.
Thank you. We are continuing to have busy days in Boulder Valley schools. And the thing I'd like to talk with you tonight about is my school visits. And the reason I'd like to talk to you about that is I think that that reminds us about why we're here tonight. So first of all, what I have to tell you about our schools is they're absolutely remarkable. And I was commenting to the president of BVEA this afternoon, that's our teachers union, that one of the things that's incredible to me is being in our classrooms and never seeing children in chairs, never seeing children in rows, never seeing children being completely still, but instead seeing children all over the room, on the floor, at the tables, at the chalkboard, with the teacher, and every child engaged in some kind of learning activity. So that when you stop and you sit down with them and you say, "What are you doing?" they look at you like, "Why are you bothering me? I'm busy." And it is great fun to have them tell you that they're writing, or they're reading, or they're doing a report, or they're working on a group project, or they're collaborating. I always like it when the kids tell me they're collaborating. And whether I'm visiting a kindergarten or whether I'm in a high school class, the thing that strikes me is one of the things we are doing in Boulder Valley schools is we are teaching our children to be thoughtful, and we are teaching our children to express themselves in a way that conveys their problem solving. And I really appreciate talking to kids in classrooms, and they can explain to me what they're learning, how they're learning it, but most importantly, why they're learning it. And I think as a Board of Education, you should be incredibly proud of the work you've done that's made it so that our teachers can do that. And I just have to tell you, every week, I get to the end of the week and I just go, these are amazing schools. Every child in America should have the opportunity to go to one of the Boulder Valley schools because of the work we are doing with them. And that when they graduate, they are great thinkers, they are great writers, they are great readers, and they are great arguers. And what could be better? So I just have to say thank you to all of you because I am having such amazing experiences visiting classrooms and visiting schools.
Thank you, Dr. Stevenson. Are there any questions for her about her inspirational comments? Anything? No? Okay, so then we'll move on to our next item, which is public participation. The board recognizes the value of public comment on issues related to the operation of the schools. To ensure that our meeting is conducted in an orderly manner, we ask that the persons who address the board confine your comments to matters that are germane to the business of the school district. Speakers on agenda items will be heard first, followed by those speaking to non-agenda items. Limit your presentations to 2 minutes. If we go over the first hour, public comment will continue at the end of the meeting. Recognize that students often attend or view our meetings. Speakers' remarks, therefore, should be suitable for an audience that includes kindergarten through 12th grade students. The board president may interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant's statement that is unrelated to the business of the district or inappropriate for K through 12 students. There is a lighting system on the podium starting at green when your 2 minutes start, turning to yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining, and turning to red at the end. When the light turns red, please wrap up your comments so that the board can hear from the maximum number of speakers. Okay. And do we have student communication first?
We do, yes.
Okay, and I'm sorry, we usually don't have student communication, which is great, so let's start with that instead. So, Mark?
School District School Board and Superintendent Stevenson. This evening, we have two students who are joining us. They are members of the Middle School Student Advisory Committee. This is another student leadership group that I have the privilege and honor of meeting with. And so they are going to take their time to come on up and introduce themselves and tell you some of the work that they're doing at the middle level.
Hello everyone, I am Sahiti Govardhanam and I'm an 8th grader at Monarch K-8. First of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my experience as an MLSAC member. And during our meeting that took place in January, we made slideshows with our group about topics that interest or some issues, such as some issue that I'm aware of is backpack rules, and an issue that my teammates chose was bullying. I know bullying is a very broad topic. There's a lot to it, and it's not a really fun topic to talk about. But bullying happens every day, everywhere. And so our slideshow, how it works is that we introduce you a type of bullying, and then we just give our opinions on some consequences or some precautions we could take. Yes, there are many precautions that have already been taken, but in my opinion, some of them don't really work. So the types of bullying include gossips, verbal bullying. So gossip and verbal bullying are basically the same, but yet they can be so different. There's physical bullying, and then there's bus bullying, which I show special interest in. So did you know that in 2012, 10% of the recorded high school or middle school bullying happened on buses? 10%, that might seem like a really small number, but it is a pretty big number. So what I mainly focused on is how the bus driver can take special actions, because yes, the bus driver has some rules, but he should focus on driving better than looking back at the end of the bus and seeing if there's people talking bad words or something like that. So that's what mainly our group focused, just finding simple ways to stop this. And yeah, our solutions are not really the best. They won't do anything, but we think this will do something to change it. And we'll have in our future meeting, which is going to take place somewhere in March or April, we'll be presenting our slideshows in front of school principals, and I'm really excited, nervous but excited for that opportunity, and I'm really glad to be involved in making my school safe, the best. And again, I would like to thank you for listening to me, and I hope you have a great night.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sinjin Suna Wayne, and I'm an 8th grader at Summit Middle Charter School. And overall, my experience in the Student Accountability Committee has been a really enjoyable one. I've really enjoyed being able to make a change for the students in the district. And so, as Sahidi has already said, we've been working on a project in our past few meetings. So my project is on student agency. And so, as you probably know, student agency is basically the availability for a student to participate in an activity which interests them as a person. So, for example, I really enjoy web design. So, maybe as a project for school, I would talk about bananas, let's say, in a website. And, that would really interest me in, using a website as a format of communication. And so we've also, my group, really focused on actually having tasks and work time and, assignments that are that have real-world applications as well. So instead of, learning about the volume of a pineapple, we'll be learning about real-world applications in, specifically STEM in science and technology, engineering, and mathematics. And so, some of the other groups have been doing school lunches, backpack rules, and bullying. But overall, I think everyone, including me, has been, really enjoying the experience and being able to make a difference in the district. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Board members, any questions or comments? Richard?
I just want to thank the students very, very much for your presentation. Are we, the board, able to see that slide presentation that you're going to be putting together?
Yes, you'll all be invited to that meeting, so you'll be able to watch the presentations as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank you too for coming and just to say how well-spoken and articulate and smart you all are. And every time I hear any of our BVSD students speak, I'm always so proud because we really have some great kids and they're really involved, and I'm so glad you all are involved.
Thank you.
It's great to hear from the middle school advisory council. We've heard from the high school students semi-regularly, and I hope both of you, Sinjun and Sahidi, will come back and bring your colleagues from that council, because we really appreciate hearing from you. On the bus bullying piece, in addition to our ongoing work to teach kindness and respect to one another, the board has been talking about cameras on buses, which would provide another set of eyes so the driver can watch the road. So we've been talking about that too. Anyway, it's great to have you here, and I hope you'll come back. Thank you for participating in this way.
Kathy?
Just want to add my thanks to Mark and to the students for coming and addressing what I think are probably challenging issues to have to come to address to a room full of adults that you've never met before. And so we hope we can be partners with you in trying to solve the issues that you're addressing, because I know they're real and they can be troubling, and we want to try to help solve this all together. So thank you for coming and sharing your participation and your thoughts with us. Really appreciate it. And you did a great job. Thanks.
Any other comments? Well, thank you so much. We really look forward to hearing the rest of what you have to say in your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we will move on to public participation, and we'll start with agenda items. And so our first speaker tonight is Paul Gomez.
Acknowledging, of course, the superintendent's respectful and informative community letter about school safety. My name is Paul Gomez. I am the father of 2 young children that attend Monarch K-8. And because of the waves of violence striking the schools in our country, I fear for their safety. I believe that all students, teachers, staff, and parents should feel safe as opposed to terrorized about their children going to school. Monarch K-8 teachers have expressed how unsafe they feel and their gratitude that someone is stepping up to speak. School teachers should not carry concealed weapons to school. A receptionist is not a security guard, and those responsibilities should not be expected from one. Monarch K-8's security guard is the receptionist, and I imagine that is the case at many schools in the district. Regarding changes that I believe can be reasonably implemented, I want you to respond to me tonight if possible, and soon if you cannot. I speak on behalf of those that are not standing up, but may believe in the kind of changes I want to see. And these are the immediate requirements we are calling for. Walkie-talkies for all of the teachers. Identifying an SRO as a school resource officer, armed SROs on both Monarch campuses full-time during school hours and community events. The power for the SRO to inspect backpacks or large bags. Strict guarding of the doors during all open entrances and exits. Both campuses need steel doors that can be locked from the inside during a lockdown. And active shooter drills need to be more elaborate than instructing the children to hide somewhere in the classroom. If the board is unable to provide funds for the SROs, then the parents of the school need permission to act autonomously in regard to raising the funds necessary to implement these safety procedures. Just a few more seconds. We want both Monarch campuses to be models for the other schools to follow. And I'm saying these things tonight because where a legislative body is sometimes unable to act, the community must step in and perform. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Neil Fishman.
President Marquez, members of the board, superintendent. I'm here tonight as a parent of a senior at Fairview High School, a former member of DPC, and a concerned citizen, and I'm speaking for myself, my husband, and at least some of my comments include input from our daughter and her friends, and I would echo your comment about their argumentative nature, especially in high school. School safety and security has never been more important than now, and in particular, gun violence in schools. Our daughter, her friends, and the rest of our family agree that we are not at all in favor of allowing teachers and staff to carry concealed weapons in the schools. However, the kids do indeed advocate for at least a couple of armed SROs in the school full-time. I have read through the slide deck entitled Safety and Security in Boulder Valley School District that will be presented later in this meeting, and my comments here are specifically referring to the target hardening slides. What is seemingly absent is any mention of metal detectors and bulletproof glass in the vestibules, and it is unclear how the campus perimeter would be further strengthened to prevent unwanted intrusions. Interestingly, at the hearing at the state capitol last week for the bill that was intended to decriminalize the carrying of concealed weapons in schools, a common comment from many speakers and legislators was that people are subjected to passing through metal detectors to enter the Capitol and other public buildings, but that is not the case for many schools, including those in the BVSD. An argument from our kids, there you go, regarding metal detectors is that they are inconvenient, delay access to schools, and create more of a closed campus than an open one. Safety always seems to be somewhat inconvenient, whether it's security at airports or public buildings such as the state capitol, seatbelts in cars, helmets for bicyclists, or metal detectors in schools. I would advocate for adding metal detectors to school entrances as a fairly simple but effective way to improve the chances that weapons could be caught before the person carrying them can even get them into the school building. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now on non-agenda items, we have Tommy Thomas.
Good evening, President Marquez, Superintendent Stevenson, and the board. I live in the area up by the field that BVSD is proposing to sell. And before we get too far down the road in that, with so many different possibilities that are being discussed and kicked around, some may be fact, some may be myth, I just wanted to bring your attention to the fact that back in May of 2010, the school district applied for a conservation easement on the larger field, the 7.8 acre tract. And the purpose of that was to protect the adjacent open space as well as Sombrero Marsh. And I think there is some kind of jumping mouse that lives down there somewhere that is mentioned in some of the county paperwork. I've spoke with open space mountain parks folks. I spoke with the county, and I have record SPR-10-0026, which is the application form for the conservation easement. And for the reasons I mentioned and a host of other reasons, that easement was granted back in 2010. Since there was no action taken at that time, that conservation easement expired after 3 years. So what I would like to bring to your attention before too many options are considered is the fact that the city of Boulder has said they are considering asking for another conservation easement, which essentially shrinks the building envelope of that field in half, which would impact, it would certainly have an impact on potential buyers and who you might seek out for potential owners of that field. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Carrie Lansman.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Carrie Lansman. I'm here with my husband, Hudson Jones, and I'm a neighbor of Tommy Thomas's, and I'm here on the same matter, but a different angle on it. I've been a 30-year resident of this neighborhood, which is right behind us over here. I've owned 2 different homes, and I have a daughter who's a graduate of the school district. We're very concerned, and the reason we're here tonight is we're very concerned about the decision-making process associated with that land. In the 30 years that I've lived in the neighborhood, it's been our assumption that if the school district did not use it for its originally intended purpose as for sites for a school, that it would be sold and the zoning would be consistent with the neighborhood. We have since learned that there are other options on the table. One of these options is a middle or high school with as many as 1,500 students and an unknown number of support staff. I read in the paper that there's no intention of this proposed school to have any public or have any transportation for the students. That means that the students and the staff would be driving into the neighborhood in considerable numbers. That would have a significant impact on a neighborhood that's really fed by small meandering streets with no sidewalks. And I feel very strongly that the impact on the neighborhood would be significant. There's 2 ways to access this site. One is off of Baseline Road, and today Baseline is heavily congested already due to commuter traffic and the Platt Middle School. In fact, tonight I got stuck in traffic just getting over here because I chose, which is usually the better route, coming out on Baseline. I did not choose to come out on Arapahoe because that's a dangerous way to get out at this time of day, because the Arapahoe intersects, Westview intersects with Arapahoe right underneath a hill. So it's a dangerous place for additional traffic to be coming into the neighborhood. There's no public transportation into the neighborhood. As I said, there's no sidewalks. The second option that I've heard is under consideration is sale of the land for high-density housing. Because of the traffic issues I've already mentioned, I also do not believe that that is a reasonable use of the property. I'm asking the board that any decision-making process that moves forward will be open, will be fully transparent, and will solicit the input of the neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Emily Burks.
Good evening. My name is Emily Burks, and I'm a resident of Boulder. And I'd first and foremost like to thank all of you for your service to the community and to the district. I have a kindergartner and a 3rd grade at Douglas Elementary, and they are loving it, as am I. I'm here tonight to talk a little bit about a memo that was submitted a couple weeks ago regarding positions on how the land came to be at Stearns Field, owned by BVSD. In particular, we believe that a portion, if not all, was dedicated to BVSD as part of the development in that area was established in the 60s. We have not heard back, and as a result, we've tried to do additional searching on our own through some core requests, and have been deeply, deeply concerned that these have been denied, as we believe that the grounds has been for the denial is actually a misuse of work product doctrine. We ask that you revisit that decision respectfully, and we will continue to pursue this avenue, and also would welcome a response to the memo that we submitted. I'd also like to just draw folks' attention to the way that BVSD handled itself in 2010 when it went down the path of selling this land. Mr. Thomas referenced an application that I actually here brought tonight, SPR 10-0026. I'd like to offer a copy of this for the record so that all of you could see this. In this application in 2010, 6 weeks before BVSD, the applicant, submitted it, it sought community input. It noticed residents that lived within 3,000 feet of the field itself and asked them about their concerns, given the land had been vacant for so long. In addition to seeking community input, the applicant, again prepared by BVSD, stated that the application thought the site was inadequate to serve as a school site, primarily due to the limited street frontage and circuitous neighborhood level access streets, And at that time, they'd also done some housing and enrollment studies that didn't support a school. There's also reference to the conservation easement that Mr. Thomas referenced as well. So I would implore you to please look at that application and the reasoning in 2010. It's not stale. And if it changes today, please explain to the community why your reasoning has changed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Craig Held.
I feel like we're going to get to know each other. Craig Held, basically, Emily covered most of my points, but the specific point is that Madam Benford prepared a document for your November 14th meeting. That core request that was being mentioned by Emily that was denied, your legal counsel needs to check the tape, because at 108 and 114, people mentioned that they'd seen the document. So that really actually puts it into the public record. And our reserve homeowners attorney are telling us that if it is in the public record, it is excluded from being protected or denied on CORA from a standpoint of it is public information. So your attorney didn't look at the tape. 108, 114, two members mentioned that they'd seen it. So I think your denial was inappropriate, and that's a follow-on to Emily's comment. I asked you last time, what's your intent? What do you want to do? Where do you want to go with this? And the community may be able to help you, but they're not going to help you if you keep them in the dark. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next item is board communication. And who would like to start? Anybody? Kathy?
Just a couple quick comments. Yesterday, I attended a meeting at the Adams Five-Star School District with Rob and Glenn on the issues around the perimeter for oil and gas drilling. And the incoming head of Colorado Oil and Gas Commission, Julie, I don't remember her last name, was in attendance, as were some school board members and representatives from the Adams Adams Five-Star District, and some other attorneys who had been looking at the issue. And it was basically, I was very impressed with Julie and her willingness to try to talk about the trying to find solutions for the perimeter, because right now, as we know, they measure for oil and gas drilling, they measure from the school building and not from the edge of the school property. And if you think about what kids are doing when they're out in the recess and running around, they're mostly inhaling those fumes and being exposed when they're running outside, and not necessarily when they're inside the school building. So there is some conversation to be had around what would the perimeter look like. And the more complicating issue is, what do you do when the schools are using community places like parks for those kinds of recreation activities? And so how do you decide where the perimeter is? How do you define it? It's much cleaner if you do it just at a school site, but she was actually open to the conversation around looking at parks and other places where children are participating in activities. So it's an ongoing conversation. I was really happy to see Glenn and Rob there to kind of talk about it and learn about it and to be engaged in the process, and I'll keep you posted as those conversations go forward. And then, as we've heard at the work session, I was at the CBOC meeting where it was brought up by several members of CBOC who have been working for over 5 years, some longer than that, on security issues with the school. And it was a unanimous decision at the CBOC to bring it up as an official agenda item at their next meeting and to talk with the board about their willingness to look at using bond money for interior cameras. And I just have to say, every time I go to this, we got a tour of the great work that's going on in Broomfield, and Ginger's super excited about all the work that's already happened and the work that's going to be ongoing, and it's really fun to see the good work that's coming out of the citizen support of our bond. And I just want to say thanks to all the members of the CBOC committee for all their hard work and dedication that they put into looking at the finances, looking at the projects, and the dedication that they give to our community as their service on that. And just a plug for the CASB convention coming up on Thursday and Friday. I'll be attending, and I don't know if anyone else is attending, but I'll give you some feedback when it's over. It's the legislative annual meeting, so we'll be meeting with legislators. And the topic this year, interestingly enough, is school choice. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the speakers around the issues of school choice.
Okay, other board members? Okay. Go.
I just want to thank everyone who came forward to speak tonight on subjects that are of concern to them. Those of you concerned about Lakeshore Estates, I think you know we tabled that decision or postponed that decision to sell that property. And I just am wondering, Cindy, what's the next step in that process? I don't remember what we're doing next there. I know we postponed it. I'm talking about Lakeshore Estates.
I'm sorry, say that again, Shelley.
Lakeshore Estates?
Lakeshore Estates. I would have to check with staff. I believe we are just going to hold on to that property for the time being. I do not expect it to be an agenda item soon. They're nodding at me, so I guess I'm okay. We are currently just planning to hold on to the property.
Okay.
Since it's been part of the application of the Summit Academy, we're going to at least postpone it until the board has an opportunity to review that application, and then we'll work with board leadership on that going forward.
Thanks for that. So I've reviewed their application, and I'm wondering, are we going to have an opportunity to talk with the people from Summit?
Yes, you will have the opportunity to talk with the two committees and the people from Summit. Yes.
So Summit will
But
be
I can't
coming
off
to the
the top-
board, a board
well,
meeting?
We are scheduling a meeting with the board for both committees, and I believe, do you know the date, Leslie?
Yep, April 10th.
Thank you.
We're going to invite Summit Academy to come and present to the board, and then, as Dr. Stevenson said, have both DAC and staff then present their recommendations at that meeting as well, so the board can
Okay.
ask any of us questions.
Okay, so a regularly scheduled board meeting.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. And then Kathy, to your comments about CBOC, I know there's a lot of concern about children's safety, and there should be, and I understand the desire to want to do whatever we can to prevent anything bad from happening to our kids. And I think that as a board, we need to sit down and discuss whether we want to put interior security cameras in our schools and what that means for our policies, which I think do not allow that. We would need to revise those, and we need to probably go through the normal budgeting process for that. I don't believe it's CBOC's charter to introduce anything that wasn't approved in the 2014 bond. So I look forward to discussing this issue more, but I think we need to do it through the proper process. Thank you.
Okay, Donna?
I want to thank the people that came forward tonight, both on safety and for the Lakeshore property. The safety issue is really high priority, and tonight we'll see a presentation. On the Lakeshore, as Shelley was talking, I had a question as I'm taking notes from the speakers. We've tabled the discussion on the sale of it, but how about the concerns on the core request? Where are we with that? Is it a definite, or are we going to review that?
We responded to all pending questions. The communications office has provided a response.
Okay, I didn't, from their presentation or from their comments, I felt that there was still some question on getting a hold of that information.
Okay, well, why don't I suggest a follow-up conversation just to see if we can get some clarity on that? So we can do that later. Any other comments, Donna?
No.
Okay, Sam? And I just had a couple things. First of all, thanks for coming. It's great to hear from our community members, and I appreciate your being here. I was able to go to an event last week that was hosted by Google and Impact on Education. Google gave a grant to BVS, or to Impact on Education, to promote computer science education among our students. It was a great presentation, and we toured the offices. I also had the opportunity to meet the new head of Impact on Education, Allison Billings, and seems like a great choice. I feel like their board is excited about her arrival, so that was a nice opportunity and a good way to meet one of our new partners at Google. And I also just want to do a quick report. I went to a quarterly meeting that is held between CU, the City of Boulder, and Boulder County. I think I just forgot to report on it last time. It was about a month ago. And the primary topic was around housing and some of the effects of housing in the area. So that's always a good meeting. It was not as long as usual. And finally, I'll just provide a broad update that we're still in the midst of the superintendent search. So the last time we met, we hadn't really kicked it off, and we're in the middle right now. And we'll just keep trudging along with that process. So that's it. Our next item is our two information items. We've added a legislative update, which is something we've done in the past during this legislative season. And it's an opportunity for board members to talk about legislative issues that are important or that they've heard of, or staff, from the, whether they hear about it from Ernestine and Tanya through our Policy Matters newsletter. So if anyone has, I think Kathy had expressed an interest in talking about something. So we can start there. And if other people have legislative issues that have come up, please feel free to chime in.
So board and staff today received an email request from our lobbyists to ask that we engage with our legislators around the issue of school funding, because if you've been reading the press coverage around what's going on at the legislature, there's a lot of requests from the transportation industry that any new money that's coming in be used for transportation. And what our lobbyists are telling us is that the K-12 lobby hasn't been as vocal as it might need to be to push back against some of that, so that not all the new money goes to transportation. So what they asked is that we all contact our legislators and other policymakers that we may know to explain what the needs are in our community around funding to help, because the anecdotal stories and the boots on the ground kind of information are always really helpful for the legislators when they try to get together and try to figure out what to do with the funding. The school finance bill itself for this year isn't going to come out, as I understand it, until after the March forecast, which I think is on March 20th. So we have a little bit of time to start doing this lobbying. And if you're not even comfortable calling it lobbying, just calling and explaining what the financial issues are that we're facing in our school district and that we're aware of in other school districts. So there was that request to be engaged at some level around the finance issues because of the it's kind of interesting. The legislature has challenges when they have to cut, and they have even bigger challenges when they have money. And I think that's what we're seeing right now, is that they're trying to figure out, because our budget actually looks better than it has in the past, but that means everybody that's had their budgets cut in the past is wanting, rightfully so, to have what they think is their fair share of the new money coming in. The issue of para, there's no bill yet introduced, but some of the tensions around, as I understand it, around the para bill are whether the new bill allows for defined contribution versus defined benefit, and also when it would take effect, because if all of a sudden it was to take effect this year, that would have a significant impact on our negotiations with our teachers and our budget, because it would be a big financial hit. And I'm thinking we're supposed to see some draft legislation in the next week or two, but I've been hearing that for a while, so who knows. I know this isn't directly related, but it was in our legislative platform. We had a hearing in front of the House Education Committee on the BEST plan, and we got it passed out of the House Education Committee 12-1, which I thought was pretty great when you consider the composition of the House Education Committee. There was a lot of support for supporting the BEST program. So those are the issues I have on the legislative update. I think I covered it all. Cindy, was there anything else?
I think the only thing is that we currently do not believe that we'll be getting any supplemental funds in the middle of the year. That's been put aside on hold, and that's kind of a blow. But we'll hold out and see. Maybe that will change.
Okay, and Kathy, could you send a template email to send to our legislators or something to that effect? Or what?
Be happy to.
Okay, thank you.
I'll work with Ernestine and see what
Or
we
just
can.
talking points,
Yeah, no, that'd be fine.
That'd be helpful to me, since I haven't been following this quite as closely.
Sure.
Any other legislative issues? Okay, our next informational item is school safety. Cindy.
As most of you know, in my time in Jeffco, I lived through both Columbine and Deer Creek, both of which were incredibly tragic events. So my radar for school safety is well-tuned and always alert. And I have been pleased working with the Boulder Valley Safety and Security Department. They're very conscientious, they're very responsive. And as you know, due to the tragedy last week, safety and security is first and foremost on our minds right now. So we thought it would be appropriate for safety and security to bring a presentation to you tonight so you know what our policies and procedures are and how we work hard to keep kids in Boulder Valley safe. So it is with great pleasure I introduce our executive director, I believe Executive Director Brendan. Director. Thank you. I'm really bad at titles. Executive Director for Safety and Security, Brendan Sullivan, who has been with us since about the time I started. I think he and I started at about the same time. So he's going to give you an overview of our safety and security procedures. While they are doing that, let me fill you in a bit on our schools. We met with high school principals today. They seemed relatively calm and the feeling that the policies and procedures in place were working. They had not had any significant increase in the numbers of threats, although Brendan has said we have gotten somewhat of an increase locally. But we did hear today that many other school districts are seeing far more reports and have seen quite a spike. I think we're seeing less. Our schools have, how are you guys doing? Okay, our school, you guys hanging in there? Okay, our schools are, of course, continuing their regular practices of drills and have also done a really incredible job of counseling for our kids and counseling for our parents, because these are difficult times for our kids and parents, and they really are caring for them. And that's one of the things that has struck me, K-12, is the care that we've put out for parents and for kids. And that is a tribute to our principals. And they should be any minute now, I'm sure. And I guess the other thing is keeping them, the other thing is I jokingly say I've had about 1 billion emails, which shows how concerned our community is. And part of the emails are parents want to be reassured. Part of it is specific questions, and part of it is suggestions. So are we ready to go, Brendan? So we are responding. I do want you to know that I respond to every one of those emails. So I'm hoping to have them done by this weekend. So if you know anybody who has not gotten a response, I'm still at it. It was probably hundreds, I would suspect. All right, Brendan, you're on.
Superintendent Stevenson, members of the board, I appreciate the opportunity tonight to come speak with you about safety and security in Boulder Valley School District and what it looks like. I'll give you a little bit of introduction on myself. I came here in August of last year from a law enforcement career. I spent almost 22 years as a police officer here in Denver Metro and also on the Western Slope. I had an opportunity to manage and lead school resource officers in the police department, where we worked in 4 different school districts, including Boulder Valley. So I've had an opportunity to work with those safety and security teams here in the district prior to coming here. What I've realized coming here is that safety is a paramount, and it's a very important issue, and it's taken very seriously. Safety and security in Boulder Valley School District is a multi-layered approach. We don't have one concept or principle that we apply to cover everything in our security and safety of our students and staff. We look at several different options and different layers that we use. We use this emergency preparedness cycle. It's preparedness, response, recovery, and prevention and mitigation. It's really an all hazards approach to incidents in our schools that may cause a threat to our students' safety. We're not looking at just how to respond to an active harmful event in our school, but we're looking at how to respond to environmental disasters, looking at how to respond to, say, a wildlife issue that's maybe threatening our students, or any other man-made crisis or mechanical crisis in our buildings. So it's really an all hazards preparedness approach to dealing with crises in our school. When I listened to some of the student reports from Parkland, one of the common themes that I heard of is that the students responded as they were trained. And that's a very important piece of safety, is when we're trained the right way and it's repetitive, we're gonna respond without having to think very much. And that's the important piece. And we do staff and student training. We do drills, and what those drills are lockdown drills, lockout drills, evacuation, shelter-in-place drills, and that is with the staff and students of the schools. We also have an emergency operations plan. So the emergency operations plan is district level. It's an all hazards resource for how we handle various events within the schools that could cause an impact to the function of the schools. We also have individual school plans, which outline roles and responsibilities and key players in those schools and how they need to respond in case of a crisis. We do conduct, or are conducting, a full-scale exercise this August, which will not include students, but will include staff, will include law enforcement, emergency management teams, and other first responders, as well as other law enforcement agencies in BVSD's footprint, to practice how to respond in an active harmful event inside of our schools. Our plans are exercised in order to reach your maximum potential of usefulness. We use the standard response protocol for how we respond to issues inside of our schools. It was adopted from or founded out of the Platte Canyon tragedy. I believe that was in 2006, and out of that came the I Love You Guys Foundation. And there's 4 actions followed by directives that are universal for handling issues inside of a school to make our kids safe. So lockdown, lockout, evacuate, and shelter in place. And each of those 4 actions has a directive, which the language is universal. So first responders know what a lockdown means. They know what the students are supposed to do, and they know what the staff's supposed to do. And through training, our staff is also aware of what those actions are, and same with our students. We also have a district unification team. So that reunification team responds to a school if we needed to get students returned to their families outside of the normal schedule, and that's in an organized and accountable fashion. I think one other thing that's important when we talk about lockdown and the standard response protocol is we talk about situational awareness, and it's not always the best option to lock down. You have to assess the environment around you and make a decision based on what you're feeling as well. So although lockdown is one of the directives that we have. We have a district crisis response team, and it's 10 teams that will go out and support the schools in case of a crisis. And they provide emotional and counseling supports to the schools. We also have a district level incident management team, which is set up through the incident command structure through FEMA standards. And that team is designed to support schools in larger events where more resources are needed. We talked a little bit about our emergency operations plan and school plans, and I think the important piece of that is that we have to make sure they're working correctly. We do tabletop exercises, we meet with safety teams of the school, we have law enforcement engaged in this process, and we are constantly reevaluating and improving our process. We're looking to see where we're weak and where we're vulnerable, and we're making the appropriate changes. The mention of target hardening earlier tonight, and I want to explain a little bit about that, is target hardening is making whatever it is, whether it's our homes, our schools, or a business, less appealing by the way they're designed, less appealing for criminal activity. So the bond is allowing us to do that at our schools, and currently I think we're about 20 schools into already. So at the end of our bond, our schools will be, all of our schools will have the same functionality. So when I say target hardening, I mean you can't just walk into our schools anymore. You have to have access, we have an A phone, an intercom phone, where people will have to identify who they are and the purpose of their business. We will have secured access or secured vestibules where they'll be able to be vetted and identified of why they're there and what the purpose of business is. We also have electronic door locks, so we're able to remotely access and control the doors. We've installed cameras on the outsides of our buildings to monitor our property on the exterior. We have intrusion detection systems and door contacts, and that's going to allow us to be notified when a door is propped open during school hours. So we can notify the staff of the school. We get an alarm here at our security center, get an alarm here, and we can call the school and let them know that they have a door propped open and they need to respond to that. We've partitioned our schools, and what that means is it allows more time for our students to be safe. It's another barrier, a physical barrier between a threat and our students. And with more time, it's going to give law enforcement or first responders an opportunity to get there and resolve the situation. We've applied material to parts of our school that will delay breaching, so it's going to take longer for someone to get in through the building. Again, that's going to allow a greater barrier between our students, the staff, and also someone who is intent on doing harm. We've automated our lockdown response, so it's a multifunction response, and it's going to change the dynamics of our school buildings. We piloted a program at 2 of our high schools, Boulder and Broomfield, of student fobs and student fob access. The response that we've got from the administration there is it's reduced door propping, so we're able to better be accountable for who's coming in and out of our building. We have threat assessment teams based at all of our schools. They're supported by district personnel, and it's a cross-functional team that's made up of admin, mental health, school, student supports, security, and also law enforcement. We're designing our schools through the CEPTED principle, so it's crime prevention through environmental design, and it's a multidisciplinary approach to deter criminal behavior by the way that the environment is designed around our schools. So what I mean by that is, if you look at lighting, for example, is the back of the school dark? Is it provide good coverage for someone to break into our schools? Is there enough lighting up front? We also talk about natural sight lines. What does our natural surveillance look like? Is the secretary receptionist at the front of the building able to see who's coming up, or is it blocked by vegetation or trees, what have you? Natural access control is we've designed our schools and the infrastructure around it to clearly identify where our visitors need to come into our schools. And then the upkeep and maintenance of our schools is what do they look like? Do they look like they're well cared for and people are attentive to the properties? We have a very strong social emotional learning program here. We promote safe and civil schools in Boulder Valley School District and positive behavioral supports with the ultimate goal of improving supports for all students by making targeted behaviors less effective and relevant while making desired behaviors normal and relative. Communication is a large part. When there's a crisis in a school, getting the people inside the school to know that there's a problem is key, to give them the time that they can respond and seek safety. So we are implementing life safety alarms in our schools, which will also have a clear directive of what you need to do if you hear this alarm go off. We've also established a protocol and a communications channel among the district leadership teams. So as soon as we're notified of an event that's occurring at our schools, we can start a conversation in this channel where we're able to communicate what the needs are, what resources need to be sent out, and how we need to support the schools. Our bond has allowed us to upgrade our radio system. We went to a digital radio system. It covers the entire BVSD footprint, and it has wide area channels on it. And so what does that mean? It means that if we're in Nederland and we're calling resources from Erie, we're able to talk on the same channel. Our law enforcement officers that also work in our schools have access and have those radios, as do our admin. So if there is an issue, they will be able to get on the same channel, whether they're on the site or not, and talk to each other, get the right resources, find out where the issues are occurring, and send appropriate response. And we're also working on a larger scale radio interoperability with our law enforcement partners. To get communication out to our community is another aspect that we've looked at, and we've established communication protocols to allow us to do that quickly and effectively. Once we've confirmed that there's an issue that's impacting our schools, we're able to send out alerts, which is a text alert to your phone, followed up by emails, phone messaging. And that data is pulled from Infinite Campus. We also have a very strong relationship with our law enforcement PIOs so that we're consistent on messaging, and a really healthy relationship with the media so that we can get our message out as well. We have recently developed this Be Ready page. It's on bvsd.org. It's a parent resource. It talks about what we do in the district and what resources are out there, what it looks like for a parent and also a student if we have an issue. It talks about the standard response protocol. So really it is a parent resource. We've also put a couple videos up there talking about reunification, what it looks like, and what your responsibility is, as well as general safety overview in the district. We also are involved in Safe to Tell, so it's through the Attorney General's office. It's anonymous reporting of any incident or any issue that may be concerning to the student or adult, and we respond to every single one of them that we get. We also conduct town hall meetings and other parent meetings at schools where we discuss safety and security within the district. Partnerships with law enforcement, our school resources, and other first responders is very crucial in maintaining a full scope of safety in our district. It's important to have them involved in our safety teams and involved in our development of emergency operations plans and also our school plans. And that's what we've done here in the Boulder Valley School District. We've also integrated them into our drills so that they're present, they can provide feedback, they can help us troubleshoot areas where we're lacking, talk about other current trends that are happening that they're seeing and implement those in Boulder Valley. They also partner with us on threat assessments. My security team is involved in a multi-jurisdictional task force that's made up of emergency management, other law enforcement, fire and EMS personnel, and other school districts, where we really just use this opportunity to brainstorm ideas, look at current trends, look at best practices, and learn from issues like Parkland and what we need to take back from those and what is applicable here to Boulder Valley School District. We have a district level safety team that law enforcement is also involved in, and that's where we evaluate current trends and vulnerabilities and look at what we can do to continue to keep our kids safe here in Boulder Valley. That's all I have for you. Do you guys have any questions?
Okay, Kathy?
Thanks for all the hard work you've been doing on keeping our students and our community safe. I just have one quick question that Rob mentioned briefly during our work session. As we know, we haven't done all of the work on all of our schools yet because the bond work isn't completed, so we don't have the security vestibules in all our schools, but there's some temporary measures I think that you're thinking about that might increase the safety at those schools that haven't had the renovations done. Do you think you could address that for a minute?
Absolutely. So most of our schools have intercom phones or some sort of controlled access through the front door. We are looking at schools on a case-by-case basis to look at what we can do in the short term to continue to further to secure our buildings, whether it's access control, remote access to doors, intercom phones. So we are looking at all of our schools on a case-by-case basis that aren't being touched by the bond at this point and making those changes.
Richard?
Thank you. Also, could you give me a concrete example from minor to major on when that threat assessment team would convene?
It would convene if we had a concerning behavior of a student where there was maybe homicidal ideations, suicidal ideations, a threat to the school, some significant behavior concerns where we need to look at the behavior and assess where they're at on a risk assessment.
Donna?
When we think about what the tragedy that just recently took place, is there a lot of conversation around the people that enter that have this in mind? They don't care if they're caught. Their plan is probably to commit suicide and take everybody else down with them. And I think our community and everybody's awareness is, what's the conversation around that, and what might be one of the
best strategies to prevent it?
Well, I don't think there's any one best strategy. I think it's, like I said, it's a multi-layered approach. It's everything from physically what we're doing, the policies we have, the relationships that we build with our first responders. It's about the emotional, social supports in our schools. It's about the counseling and the threat assessment supports as well. So it's not just, I can't say if you do A, you're going to solve the problem, because it's not, that answer's not that simple, so.
I understand totally, but there's a great article in National Geographic this month about how they were able to change the behavior of teens at juvenile facilities through a lot of counseling, and how the brain was taught or retaught to consider having more compassion and more relationships. But just an interesting article everybody ought to read.
Okay, other comments? Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing this information. We really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
All right, our next item are our action items in consent grouping, and I'm going to read them off. 8.1 personnel items, 8.2 approval of minutes, 8.3 approval, February 13th, 2018 special meeting, 8.3 approval of minutes, February 13, 2018 regular meeting, 8.4 approval of minutes, February 20th, 2018 special meeting, 8.5 approval of minutes, February 20th, 2018 special meeting, 8.6 amendment to the construction manager general contractor contract for bond-funded improvement work at Fairview High School, 8.7 closeout to the construction manager general contractor contract for bond-funded work at the Aspen Creek K-8 school. Are there any items board members would like to pull? Any questions or comments about the items? Okay. Can we get a motion to approve the items? Kathy, second by Kitty. Laura, do you want to call the roll or call the vote?
Benford. Fuqua.
Yes.
Garcia. Yes. Gebhardt. Yes. Marquis.
Yes.
Myers. Yes. Sargent.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so then we'll move on to our action items. Does anyone need a break before we move on? Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break before we move to our action items. All right, we're going to move on to our action items, and our first action item is the approval of the 2018-19 budget development priorities. First we start with a motion to approve, and then we'll do discussion. So do we have a motion to approve? Moved by Kathy, seconded by Kitty, and now, and do you want to talk about this a little bit, Cindy, first as well?
This is pretty clear, and it states the priorities that we've heard from you across our work with you. If you have specific questions, we will call Bill Sutter up, but we believe this reflects what we've heard from the board in terms of their priorities. So it's a step before the budget approval, so that when you approve the budget, you can go back, look at these priorities and say, are we meeting what we said our priorities were?
Okay. Any questions or discussion, Donna?
The one that hit me when I started looking at this was not only in the negotiations day that we spent with in that room, but one priority I see missing is budget sustainability.
That's a good point. You all have talked about budget sustainability. Could we have Mr. Sutter join us? And could you address the goal of budget sustainability?
That certainly could be something added to the list. I don't believe it is defined at this time. I don't know how to define that as far as what everybody is thinking individually or collectively what budget sustainability means. We have board policy that says ongoing revenues or ongoing expenditures must be paid for by ongoing revenues or something like that, which is an indication of a sustainable budget. So there's policy already that exists, statute that requires board resolutions around use of one-time dollars for one-time items and how that won't lead going to an ongoing deficit. So we have policy in place already that identifies some of that. If there were to be a budget priority around sustainability, I would need some guidance into what that means beyond what's defined in policy right now.
Okay. That's a really interesting point. I think that when we talk about budgets every year, we always talk about sustainability. So it's interesting whether it's a priority or whether it's just an inherent part of every discussion we have about the budget, if that makes sense.
It does, but we talk about equity and social emotional learning and investment in literacy and instruction. So I just wanted to make sure that we know that with the negotiations that we're coming up with contracts, that we're in a position that we know what's coming in, and there's only so much. And so I do think budget sustainability is really one of our priorities.
Comments, board member Shelley?
So when you say these are the priorities of the board, how exactly do you determine that? Because we all had sort of different lists. And I don't see, for example, class size represented on this list. And I don't know what other programs for students means. So what could that encompass?
That could encompass a lot. There was a long list of requests for budget priorities by individual board members, and a list of 35 items is not what we need to develop a budget. We need something a little bit more concise to be able to work within to develop a budget as far as overarching priorities for what should be included in the budget. So class size is certainly a specific interest in a budget item, but the priority of additional programs or meeting student needs and things like that, that's the sort of overarching.
So are you saying class size could be included in here, in one of these overarching
It could be,
bullet
yes.
points? Where would it be?
Probably the other programs for student needs.
Okay. So nothing's excluded from this list. There could still be discussion about anything at this point.
I would say, for the most part, you could probably come up with something that doesn't fit in there somewhere, but for the most part, if it's a program that is deemed to improve student achievement somehow, it's going to fit in there, or close the achievement gap or the opportunity gap. I mean, those are certainly overarching priorities.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Richard.
Yeah, I have a similar question, Bill. I'm looking at family engagement as a priority, for example. That could be included under the other programs for students too?
Or the opportunity gaps, that certainly fits in there as well. Certainly.
Okay. And then just following up on the sustainability question, I am more interested in the future sustainability as opposed to this year, but the future sustainability, if we continue spending the way we're spending, at what point are we going to run out of money?
So at this point in time, we have a budget that was adopted by the board in January that has ongoing revenues matched to ongoing expenditures. So that is a structurally sound budget for the current year, and all things being equal, moving forward into next year without changes, we would have a balanced budget as well. The change in compensation relative to staff negotiations or adding programs or anything like that certainly would need additional revenue to cover that, and that's, again, part of the annual budget process. So there are the concept of a structurally deficient budget is where you are spending fund balance to maintain programs, and that occurs in some places. We have not been doing that. We are very clear when we are spending fund balance and state in the board resolution how that will not lead to an ongoing deficit. So we would not increase expenditures beyond what we have revenue for in the next year.
Now that's generally understood by everyone?
Is that a question or a statement?
It's a question. Is that generally understood by everyone?
Everyone in the budget office? You bet.
In terms of the community, the board, the whole world, I mean, do we know that? I mean, I guess what I'm saying is there something that we could put in there as a guiding principle of some sort that would inform teachers, community members, that this is the position that Boulder Valley School District has taken?
Well, certainly the board policy DB that exists right now that states that ongoing resources and expenditures, you basically can't deficit spend. So that exists right now. With the policy also stating reserve levels. So those are two areas that are often missing in places that are struggling, is not having policy that states that you won't use ongoing or won't pay for ongoing expenditures with one-time resources. So I don't.
We don't?
What's that?
I'm sorry, we do or we don't have policy?
We do.
We do.
We do, okay.
Yep, yep.
I just think it's an interesting question, but I think our policies and statute tell us that we can't have a budget that's not sustainable. And trying to predict what's going forward, we have to deal with that when we actually have the numbers. So I'm comfortable having policy and statute guide us in this, because we can't not have a sustainable budget. And so this just tells us how to invest it, which I thought was what the priorities were for, but I could be persuaded otherwise.
Comments, Shelley?
So, Bill, you remember that budget projection model you put together a couple of years ago, or maybe not even a year and a half ago or so. And it showed us if we were to progress in the way we had been with steps and lanes and salary increases, that we would come up short about $5 million each year in the 3 years that you forecasted out. So given what you just said about, there'd be a policy that we be sustainable, how do you fit those together? I mean, that projection would say unless we do something, we will be $5 million short in these 3 years, right? Each of these 3 years, not, right? I mean, if we continue to do everything the way we are now, this is where we will end, is what that said.
Well, I would disagree that that's what it said. It said based
Okay,
on a
that's what
set
I'm
of
asking.
assumptions.
Yeah, based on a set of assumptions that were, if we progress normally and don't change anything, this is where we would be. I think that was the assumption in that projection.
The assumption was that there would be pay increases. It was at a very high level across total district funds. There were a lot of assumptions in there. But certainly, those are the annual decisions that need to be made based on revenue available and what expenditures are.
Right. So what we're saying is we need to adjust those assumptions if we did not want to have a deficit in those years.
Unless the revenue is different, then what
Right,
does it
but the
say?
assumption was the revenue was going to be what it was in that model, so. If the revenue was correct in your assumptions, then something would have to be changed in your expense assumptions to make sure we were not $5 million short in those 3 years.
Correct, and we changed the revenue in the district.
So in my mind, balanced budget and sustainable budget are two different things. And so that's why I'm pushing that sustainable budget be part of our priority.
Okay, Kathy?
I guess I'm just unclear as to what that means. Does that mean 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 year? We don't really know. So that's why I think just knowing that we have to balance it from year to year. So I don't know how we would define that. I'm not against it. I just don't know how we define it because I think we're constrained by our policies and by statute. So that's the question I have.
Okay, other comments? Sam, want to chime in?
When we approach something like the contract with our Teachers Association, we want to understand that if we're committing to 3 years of this pay, that it is sustainable over those 3 years. Yeah, and I completely agree with you, Donna. I do think there are assumptions and there are variables, particularly the state funding, but that I'm certainly aware of that when I'm going into deciding on those major long-term commitments. If we need to add additional verbiage somewhere, I'm certainly happy to consider that. But I do think our policies are pretty strong in that regard, and it's our responsibility as board members not to commit to something unsustainable.
So Donna, do you feel that you're okay with it worded as is, but knowing that we're looking at sustainability when we're looking at both the administrator salary survey and then the union contract?
Yes, it has to do with looking at all of those coming
Right.
up. It's the negotiations, it's what our community thinks, well, can we ask for this? Can we ask for that? How much can we ask for and still have a budget that is sustainable?
So if we're good with this as is, are you all ready to vote on these budget priorities? All right, Laura, would you like to call the vote?
Benford. Fuqua.
Yes.
Garcia.
Yes.
Gebhardt.
Yes.
Marquis.
Yes.
Myers.
Yes.
Sargent.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Okay, then our next item is the approval of staffing. Does anyone want to make a motion to approve the staffing item? Kitty, seconded by Kathy. I always just look to the right. And do you want to talk about the staffing?
Just to tell you that this is essential. We need the approval of staffing so we can allocate staffing to schools and they can begin staffing their schools. And so it impacts hiring, it impacts retention of our probationary teachers. So it is critical.
Okay. Any questions on staffing, board members?
When you're talking about staffing, you're talking about all staff, right? Including community liaisons, interventionist, everything, or just teachers? What?
I believe, this is just teacher staffing. No, this is total staffing. Thank you. They're telling me it's total staffing. I thought it was just teacher staffing.
So when we're looking at community liaisons, how are we looking, I mean, how do we staff those? Is that on a prorated?
That's a school decision on community liaisons. So I'd have to get you some more information on that tomorrow.
Okay, so if a school needs, say for example, community members think that a school needs community liaisons, and the principal doesn't agree with that, how can we resolve that?
That would be an issue that we would deal with in the school management area. And so the community, if it's a community principal split, then we would work with Mark Schaefer or Sandy Ripplinger and work to bring the competing interests together.
So I know of a couple of situations, but who should I just talk with?
You can send it to me and I'll get it to Mark or Sandy, or you can send it directly to Mark or Sandy.
Thank you.
Other staffing questions, Kathy?
I have two quick questions. It says minimal projected student growth was included. What does that mean? Because I think we're looking at pretty flat enrollment and are thinking about budgeting for even declining enrollment. So what does that look like?
The charter schools are projected to grow by plus or minus 30, and the general fund is a rounding error off 0, so like 5 or something. I mean, it's the projection on FTE are very, very close.
Pretty close to flat funding. And then can you explain what you mean by reallocating resources to reset the 2.25 staffing cuts at schools? What does that mean? Does that mean we're wiping it away, or I don't know what that means.
We are attempting to make a stab at fixing this problem that we have. It is our own little negative factor that we have been dragging around since 2010. It is a topic of conversation. I believe it came up in the DAC recommendations to do something about it. We know that it's somewhere between $3.2 and $3.5 million to fix the whole thing all at once, which we are not attempting to do. There are some positions that schools cut fairly uniformly across them at different levels. They did it differently at different levels. So our goal is to reset the staffing for that particular category of position, and the net across the level will remain the same from what was there but the year before, but we need to reset so that schools will have a new number going forward. There are some cases that doing that reset doesn't make any sense. So for example, at the elementary level, there was only one school that cut teacher FTE during that process. It's a 0.3 something teacher. So it doesn't make sense to go reset the entire staffing formula for elementary schools for that one little piece. So that's something that we would restore in this process. A 0.04 counselor at the middle level. I mean, some of these sort of goofy little things that only one school did. So it's sort of a basket of goods to try to fix this and be able to move forward. So there's some effort to make everybody come out ahead a little bit within existing resources, as well as with the school resource allocation, the operating dollars that a school gets, to start over with a new formula. The formula that exists right now has about 10 different components to it. You get so much for a base amount per student. It's kind of like the School Finance Act. So much for a base student, and then you get a little bit more depending on the category of student. So a little bit of a weight, but it's like $25 or $20 per pupil. There's dollars in there for copier allocations and printing and staffing and curriculum development, staff development. And then we have the cut at the end, right? So then this negative factor thing that cuts everything. And it's hard to deal with. There are some cliff things in there relative to the copier formula that one student means you lose $1,000 or $2,000 in that copier formula. So what we're doing is getting rid of the whole thing and saying you get a base amount for a student and then a significant weight for poverty. Because when it comes to the school resource allocation, the poverty is the big factor because of fundraising, that schools are not able to fundraise. So a very heavy weight on the poverty factor and then some additional amount for second language and special education. And in redoing that, and to fund that, we're suggesting eliminating one of the assistant superintendent positions that will be unfilled for next year. So that's a way to reallocate some of the resources that are currently in the budget to do that. So it's a kind of a whole package deal that needs to go together, both on the staffing side, the SRA side, to sort of lift all the boats a little bit, not all the way, but as much as possible.
Just real quick, will this formula, a lot of times we try to have this done before spring break, and so the principals can prepare their staff. The formula you were just talking about, will that prevent a lot of the appeals that we see taking place after FTE is distributed?
No, certainly, particularly at the elementary level, those appeals come with students enrolling. You know, we have to deal with the whole open enrollment process, targeting how many classrooms are going to be filled up, and that, you know, iterative process of staffing at the elementary level, which is a bit more challenging than the secondary, where you have a little bit, you're dealing with a larger school typically, but you can also deal with a smaller class portion than at the elementary level. So it will not prevent that appeal process from happening as has in the past.
So do you have an overall goal for replacing the 2.25%?
To not talk about it anymore.
Okay. Is there a number associated with that? I'm not talking about something you're promising. I'm just saying, do you have an idea in mind of?
We have the entire budget that we're trying to build and put together around this whole concept. So it's not a particular number in place. It's really kind of what will the budget sustain as it is, because we have some flexibility existing within current resources, so not adding, and then making some reductions where we have that flexibility as well. So no, I don't have a number, but I joke about it, but I think just like the state negative factor, we all thought originally that this was going to last for maybe a year or two, or no way 3, and pushing 10 years later, hopefully we can begin to have conversations about what do we do next. What, instead of, wait a minute, we need to fix this past thing, because it's very difficult to talk about what are we going to do next. I think there's significant conversations and opportunity around the proposed School Finance Act and if funding comes with that, to really look at doing staffing differently, look at a true weighted student formula that allocates resources based on poverty and second language, and tie the staffing allocation a little closer to how the School Finance Act is allocating resources. And that's no small feat in and of itself to do that. So it's very exciting, actually, to look at that possibility of what that would be. But again, we would be in the place of, wait a minute, we need to fix this before we can really move on. So there's sort of a interim step to that next piece.
Thank you.
Other questions, Kathy?
So what's the budgetary impact of what you just described? It's somewhere less than 3.5 million
Within the existing budget, it's nothing.
because you're just reallocating?
But it's not 3.5 million, I'll tell you that.
Other comments? And I'll just comment, I would be delighted if we could not have the 2.25 anymore. I think that's great that you're working on that, so thank you. All right, so are we ready to call the vote on the approval of staffing? Laura, do you want to call the vote?
Benford. Fuqua.
Yes.
Garcia.
Yes.
Gebhardt.
Yes.
Marquis.
Yes.
Myers.
Yes.
Sergeant.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so our next action item is to appoint another member to the District Audit Committee. And Donna is already on the committee because she's our board treasurer. Thank you for volunteering. And we need a second person to serve on the audit committee. And I think you can self-nominate for this, and we just made it an action item separate from the other committee list, because those committees we need to talk about a little bit. So, and does anyone believe that you can't self-nominate on this? Oh, we've nominated someone else? I thought we just spoke about it casually, frankly. Right. Yeah. Mhm. Okay, so well, let's talk about it. Okay, so who wants to be on the District Audit Committee? Kathy and Shelley. And so because I did hear interest from two people, and so is the best process to vote? Would you all like to vote?
Well, I was thinking about this. Why can't we all three be on the audit committee? Is
Oh, I
there
think
any-
you can because it's a public meeting.
Well, I mean, just appointed to the audit committee. There's no rule that it says it has to be one other person. I don't think.
Right. That's the only reason why I think we've always gone with two.
But any other board member may attend, is that correct?
Yes.
Just not an official member of the committee.
Yes, and this committee doesn't vote.
Yeah, it doesn't.
So it doesn't really, that's the part of it, is it doesn't, it just audits. So it's hard to know why. I'm fine with both of you going. I personally would.
And I encourage anyone who might be considering being the board treasurer at a future time to also attend the audit committee meetings.
Great point, Sam.
Or someone that has been the treasurer that could help give feedback. I would like that too, as well as people that are interested in being there in the future.
And I think that's why I'm interested, not that people are typically knocking down the door to be on the audit committee, I realize that. But Donna's new, and I was treasurer before. And so for me to step back and to, help out in that capacity, it was one of the reasons I was interested, so.
I was on the audit committee, and I was just interested in continuing to work on it because I find it important and informational. And I thought my understanding of finance issues and could also be helpful to Donna.
So we can, and so the only difference is it needs to be noticed then, because it's more than two members, but we always notice it anyway, so it doesn't really make a big difference. So, yeah, we've been trying to make it available to all of our board members, so if we're all okay, we can have two? For a
Can I
total of
check
three?
with Bill? Do you see any problem, Bill, with having 3 board members attend? Other than that, we probably need to do a policy revision?
I don't think we need to do a policy revision.
You don't think we need to do the policy revision? Okay.
The only thing that I would suggest is, it would be nice to have the official member that is identified in board policy as the second member, because that's what policy says. I don't know what procedure is, but do you waive policy if you're actually going to say that we want 2 additional members on to, because that's not what policy says, but.
Melissa, what do you think?
Melissa, can you turn your microphone on, please?
Policy refers to the audit committee members. So that second board member would be the one that the board's appointing tonight. Anybody else could attend, but I do think you would need to amend your policy or waive your policy. Okay.
So between the two of you, if one of you is appointed to the committee, would the other one still just want to go anyway? Or would you, between the two of you, only want to go if you were actually on the committee?
Well, I have a question for Melissa. How hard is it to waive it for this year so that Shelley and I could both be on it?
Well, the appointment is for a 2-year term.
Okay, so for
according
2
to the
years, but I mean
policy.
waive it for this appointment.
Waiving the policy?
Yeah, I don't know what that process looks like.
Right, I know, we have another policy that talks about the waiver, so let me look at that. No pressure, Melissa. So is that all of your preferences to go with 3? Okay. So you'd rather go 3? Your preference is to go with 3, so I know we'll continue.
Well, I think if Melissa can't find a policy that makes this okay, we should probably just go with a policy and elect somebody. I mean, if that's what staff prefers, so.
Well, it sounds like we have to waive the policy, that's all. Well, what I'm finding right now is just this section that allows you under BG to suspend or repeal policy with 2/3 majority vote of the board members present. So we're not trying to suspend a policy in total, and that's really what this is geared toward in special circumstances. So I think looking at doing some kind of policy amendment, if that's what the process you want to, if you want to explore having 2 members, additional members on the board, that you would go through just the normal study action process. That's not what this is
So we just do
intended to
one or
address.
more?
Pardon?
We could just say appoints 1 or more additional members, some kind of language like that at the policy. Okay. All right, board members, what are your thoughts?
So we would table this for now. Hopefully, everybody would still attend the audit committee who wants to attend, and then we would come back with some modification to allow a couple people to be members. Is that kind of where this is going?
I think so. I mean, unless it doesn't make a big deal who's actually appointed, and then everyone can attend. I think that was the question asked, is it? Right, that was
Yeah, that's
I mean,
Kitty's
it's a good question. I
Kitty,
mean-
we all think you should do this, actually, because,
I was going to volunteer and then you two did, and I thought, well, I'll just go anyway, so.
so it's going to be a big room.
Yeah.
Well, we were just thinking, since you were interested in being the treasurer
Yeah.
originally, that it
Yeah.
might be good experience for you to be on
And
the
that's,
audit committee.
that was my original thought, but then I thought, we don't need 3 people vying for 2 seats when I could, 1 seat, when I could just go anyway,
Right,
so.
right. Yes, that's good, yeah. So I'm fine, let's just vote on somebody. I'm fine with that, and then whoever wants to go can go. I mean, that seems like it's simpler and within policy, so.
So Shelley, can I verify, you're suggesting the board go ahead and vote on the second member, but it's understood among the board members that if others of you want to come to the audit committee, you're always welcome?
Right, well, Melissa's saying that's policy, and I think that is policy, so.
Could make a motion to appoint, that second board member, and with a second, and then take a vote.
And you could vote yes or no.
Wait, I missed that.
We'd need a motion to appoint, we'd need a motion to appoint a second board member, and then you could vote yes or no on that board member.
Yeah, that's what's in the agenda now, right, to do that?
There's nothing in policy that requires that second person be put on there.
Do you want me to read you the policy?
Yes.
Is that helpful? Okay. It's just a one sentence. The district audit committee shall be comprised of 5 members, 2 board members, one being the board treasurer, who shall serve as chair of the district audit committee, and the other member appointed by the board for a 2-year term.
So they are listed.
So it does say shall, so I guess that sort of implies that it has to be a second person. All right, I stand corrected.
It's the word appointed that gets us in trouble. Right.
Well, I nominate myself, and I will not be heartbroken if I do not get the position. But I do have experience as a former treasurer of the board, and I'd love to help Donna out in this capacity. So.
And presumably, you're going to nominate yourself as well?
Oh, you mean if I'm not?
There's a motion on the floor, and I second that motion.
Okay, Laura, do you want, any discussion, board members? Yeah, Kitty?
Okay, so Shelley, you're not going to be heartbroken. Kathy, are you going to be heartbroken?
I'll be like you. I will attend because I was already on the audit committee and I didn't want to continue to do that.
Okay. And Shelley, will you attend if we elect Kathy?
Absolutely.
Okay, then. Laura, would you like to call the roll? Or call the vote?
Okay, the motion on the floor
vote's on.
is that the Board of Education will appoint Shelley Benford to the District Audit Committee. Benford,
Yes.
Fuqua,
Yes.
Garcia,
Yes.
Gebhardt. Marquis. Myers. Sergeant.
Yes.
Motion passes.
So that's why it was an action item. All right. Thank you, Shelley, for volunteering. Kathy, thank you for volunteering. Kitty, I'm so glad you're going to go too. This is great. Well, I've been going, and I went for the last 2 years, so maybe I'll come too. All right, so the next action item is a 9.4 elementary literacy instructional materials adoption. I need a motion to approve. Kitty moved, and, okay, and does someone want to second it on my left this time? Okay, Sam will second it. And what questions do we have about?
I believe the staff has a presentation.
Oh, you're going to present?
Yes,
Okay.
here they are. Here they are to present. We'd like to introduce Samantha Messier, who is our Assistant Superintendent for Instructional Services, who has led a long process on elementary literacy adoption, has involved, I want to say, countless people. It felt like countless the day I went, and has done just a marvelous job in managing the process. So, Sam.
Thank you so much. Good evening, President Marquis, Dr. Stevenson, members of the board. It's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the Reading Materials Selection Committee to propose what we're hoping that you will adopt this evening. So I'm just going to cut to the chase and let a couple of our fine committee members speak to you about some of the things that they're most excited about in these selections. First of all, I'd like to thank all of the committee members. They put in a tremendous amount of work to be a part of this process and took the work very seriously, and we're really committed to it. So I've got 4 of them here, a parent, 2 teachers, and a principal, to share with you some highlights from the what we're asking you to approve this evening. Alex, you want to come up first and introduce yourself?
Good evening. My name is Alex Johnson. I teach 3rd grade at University Hill Elementary. I've been there for 7 years. And we have 3 dual language elementary schools in our district, as you know. We have 3 varying models, all research-based, but we have the same goal, which is to graduate bilingual and biliterate students. Luckily supported now by the Seal of Biliteracy on diplomas of students who graduate 12th grade as bilingual and biliterate students. Up until now, we haven't really had the resources to be able to support that. So luckily with this process, we've had access to review multiple different resources and sets of materials to support a high level of rigor in academic success and literacy success in our bilingual students. And the materials that we've chosen not only meet the needs of our district and the literacy framework we have in place at our district, but they also really support us in meeting the 3 pillars of dual language education, which are bilingualism and biliteracy, high academic achievement, and sociocultural competence. Some of the things my fellow teachers and I are most excited about with these materials in order to support teachers and students include authentic texts being at the core of the primary program that we are adopting, that we are suggesting we adopt. High quality authentic Spanish literature by Latinx and Hispanic authors, or true transliterations and not just poor translations of books that were written originally in English. In fact, nothing that we looked at past phase 1 if it didn't meet that high standard, which we felt greatly supported by as dual language teachers. The biliteracy pathway in the ReadyGen program, which is produced by Pearson, was co-authored by Olivia Ruiz Figueroa, who is part of the Literacy Squared program at CU, which all 3 of our schools have had experience working with, which gives us confidence that it was a program that was truly written for dual language students, teachers, programs. One of the primary benefits that teachers will get are materials that are already there in front of us. We spend countless hours creating our own resources, creating our own materials. We're spending a lot of energy trying to find the money for high quality books or materials that go with our literacy program. So one thing we are all just sighing in relief to have are materials that are produced and purchased for us so that we can truly focus on how we are meeting our students' literacy needs, building bilingual connections in their brains, and using data to inform our instruction based on how our students fare using those materials first. We are proposing both a core program and a foundational skills support program, which is going to be adopted in pre-K in addition to kindergarten and first grade. We look forward to seeing how that proves in our data to establish a very strong foundation in Spanish literacy. It was not, I can just continue on from there. We're really looking forward to seeing over the next couple of years a much stronger foundation in Spanish literacy to truly support both our dominant English and our dominant Spanish speakers in their biliteracy goals. And I think I've kind of touched on all of it. We're really looking forward to hearing your decision on this tonight. Thank you.
Good evening, school board members, Superintendent Stevenson. My name is Erin Nelson, and I was a parent member of the committee. First, I'd like to thank the administrative team who ran the process. It was a fair and a transparent process, and I feel like all the voices in the room were heard. And I'd especially like to thank all the teachers. They brought their expertise and their passion and their commitment to our children in our schools, and that was a wonderful thing. So tonight I'm going to talk about Wilson Foundations. Wilson Foundations was supported by 80% of the committee as the best choice to teach foundational skills. Foundations was released in 2002 as a general education program to teach reading and spelling. In 2012, it was updated to align with the Common Core, and today it's used in 40 states and hundreds of districts across the country. Foundations provides all students with a foundation in reading and spelling by teaching them explicitly how our language works. At the same time, Foundations provides differentiation strategies both for struggling readers and for advanced readers. The instructional principles used in Foundations are research-based and include phonemic awareness, phonics word study, high-frequency word study, fluency, vocabulary, handwriting, and spelling. I believe Foundations combined with Fontes and Pinnell classrooms will give our students the best opportunity to become strong readers and lifelong learners. Thank you.
Thank you, board members, for the opportunity to share with you tonight. And thank you to Dr. Messier and Ms. Stoba for leading us through such a comprehensive materials adoption process. My name is Heather Hansen, and this is my 18th year in Boulder Valley. And this year I'm teaching second grade at Alicia Sanchez International. And as I think about the crazy, beautiful life of an elementary classroom teacher each day, there are a few core reasons why I think Fountas and Pinnell Classroom really rose to the top and became part of this final recommendation. To begin, it's got an instructional coherence and connectedness across all the components of literacy. And as Alex said, teachers spend double, triple shift to pull together all of the resources to really be able to meet the standards in an engaging and culturally responsive way. And this FPC piece is the closest we've seen as a committee to the whole package. So it includes targeted small group texts, it includes shared readings that build language, it includes inquiry-based interactive read-alouds, these book clubs where there's rich discussion and talk around books, together with kids leading those discussions. There's engaging phonological awareness piece, and the phonics and word study skill instruction embedded in the Fountas Pinnell Classroom goes all the way up through the 6th grade. So the idea of having a robust and comprehensive blueprint with precise learning targets and resources to teach them is just beyond energizing to us out in the field. And so while the resources are very comprehensive and explicit, the second reason that Fountas and Pinnell rose kind of stood out in the pack is because it's laid out so a new teacher or a really seasoned teacher can really access it. So there are standards-based teaching language in every lesson, and the teacher can start with that exact lesson and then expand or refine based on the needs of their students and also as he or she grows in the profession. So that might mean teachers choosing to build additional context for kids who are bilingual learners. It might mean teachers taking the lesson and providing additional scaffolds for those who have not yet met targets. It's also honoring students' passions and talents and their interests throughout these lessons. That balance of a lot of structure and also of letting teachers' decision-making play a role is really a beautiful balance. It seems like a powerful fit for Boulder Valley. Now, for the most fun reason, the books are beautiful. They're authentic, they're engaging, they represent diverse cultures so that as many students as possible can see themselves and their families and their traditions reflected and valued in the classroom. And at a functional level, FPC Core Classroom Program also matches the benchmarking assessments we're already using across the district in all our elementary schools. So that connection between the assessment and then, okay, now what do we do about it, is only going to be stronger in our elementaries. So Boulder Valley has a great tradition in individuality and uniqueness in our school. So when we think about moving to one monolingual literacy program, for a monolingual literacy programming, moving to one system, we need to do that in a way that honors IB schools, that honors PBL schools, that honors our STEAM schools, our Innovative Spaces schools, all of the uniqueness that we have. And so we really believe that the structure of FPC has the heart and the ability to do that. And thank you for really empowering us to be able to have the full battery of resources that we really have needed for so long. I did not put tear up at the end in my notes, but this has been a long time coming, and thank you for giving us the meat. Hopefully, pending approval.
Good evening, board members, Superintendent Stevenson. I'm Jen Bedford, principal at Superior Elementary, and this is my 7th year there, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it, but I agree with all of our committee members here. This has been a long time coming. Our students in our schools have very diverse needs, and the literacy materials that we have selected can and will be adapted to meet those individual needs of our students. Selecting a district-wide literacy program was an overwhelming task because we want the best for our students. We want a resource that is research-based and able to meet the needs of all of our students. When we started the process of selecting a district-wide literacy program, we identified some of the common themes that helped to guide us toward our selection. We agreed that we all wanted authentic texts that were high quality and highly engaging, bilingual texts that are not translated from English to Spanish, small group instruction for students with diverse learning needs, materials that are linked to online resources, and leveled libraries that are aligned with other subjects and consistent with our BBSD and state assessments. We believe our recommendation this evening for adopting the proposed materials district-wide will be the best approach to ensure that all of our students have access to high-quality materials and instruction. By adopting these programs, teachers will be provided with quality professional development, opportunities to collaborate with colleagues around the district, and students will experience smoother transitions when moving between our BBSD schools. Thank you so much for your time, support, and consideration.
So you can see with committee members like this that the process went really smoothly. We had some really great quality folks that were a part of this process and really put a lot of heart into it. And finally, I want to recognize Angel Stobaugh, our Director of Language Arts and Literacy, who helped to lead this process and was really instrumental in bringing all of this together. And if you all have any questions, we'd be happy to answer those now.
Okay, who'd like to start? Kathy?
Do you want to come join me for questions?
I just want to say thank you. I was reviewing the comments on the evaluation of the process, and it looked like you got all 4s and 5s and very positive comments on the transparency in the process. So I just want to say thank you to all of you for your hard work in bringing this forward, because that was really impressive on the time frame you had to do it and with the comments that you got. So thank you.
Thank you.
Richard?
I do want to thank you very much for the hard work you put into this, and I want to thank the committee that worked with you on this. I have one question, and that's the Wilson. Will that be available for the bilingual schools also?
Yes, we'll have it available, so they'll have the English foundations, and then they'll have Estrellita for the Spanish.
Thank you.
Questions over here? Donna?
Not one question, but I want to thank you. You guys, your presentation was wonderful. I looked at the report that you had online, and I'm impressed with the 80% approval. Bringing all those people together and getting that kind of consensus, it's a wonderful outcome. I want to know, I've been in a process before where we have adopted curriculum and we did not see it implemented appropriately. So I started going out to each school and helping the teacher learn what it was that we were purchasing. I'm wondering if the board will be able to get a report about the implementation and the appropriateness of it, and if that's going to be something we'll be updated on.
That would be something we'd be happy to provide you with some information on. So our planning for implementation, we've already been doing some of that, but it officially starts tomorrow after we get it approved. And we can begin putting the pieces together to ensure that we have a really strong implementation plan. We've actually invited some of our principals to come in and do that planning process with us so that they can lead this work effectively in their buildings.
And I'm really glad to hear that. And I really think, I just can't thank you enough. I think our students will become not only better spellers, but they'll be great decoders. Thank you.
Thanks.
Other comments? Shelley? Oh, go ahead, Katie. Oh, Katie.
I just wanted to reiterate things. When I read through this report, I was really impressed. So just, you all did a great job. And it also kept making me think about how I learned to read with Dick and Jane. And we have come so very far since then. And I actually learned how to read anyway. But good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shelley?
Yeah, thank you for your report and for the presentation. They were both really helpful. So just a few questions. It looks like there's a couple things still outstanding in this presentation. One is whether foundations will be used in general ed for grades 2 and 3.
That's correct. So we still have a decision to make on that, and we'll be bringing the committee back together to help make that decision.
Okay.
The reason that we've delayed that decision until a little bit later is that we felt like more objective evidence to put before the committee would be really helpful.
Okay.
So the consultant from McCrell International who did the review of foundational skills for us is going to do a side-by-side comparison of the phonics component of foundations for grades 2 and 3 and Faunus and Pinnell Classroom for grades 2 and 3 so that the committee can look at those two side by side and make an informed decision about whether to use foundations universally or for targeted.
So tonight, we're asking that foundations be approved, and then we'll be looking at the implementation process.
Okay, so you're not going to come back and say, now that you've approved it for K1, will you also approve it for 2, 3? How does that part get approved? Is that just built into this approval tonight?
That is our hope, that we
Okay.
build it into this approval tonight, so
Okay.
that we can just go forward with that.
Yeah, okay. And then the other open question seems to be Fountas and Pinnell grades 3 through 5,
That's correct.
right?
So we were able to see some pre-publication copies of those. So the publisher worked with us and was cooperative and provided pre-publication versions. So the committee didn't go into this blind. They've seen what the content looks like for grades 3, 4, and 5. But we felt we would be more comfortable if we waited to take this to you for formal approval until we'd seen final published copies and done a quality check on them.
Okay, so we're
We'll be
approving
bringing those back to you.
all of the Fountas and Pinnell, or just 3 through 5?
3, 4, 5.
Okay.
Yep.
And if you do your quality check and you are not convinced, then you'll be looking for different curriculum for 3 through 5, and you'll keep Fountas and Pinnell for first and second? Right?
Yes, that would be the plan, although we feel like that's pretty unlikely.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So just a couple other questions. Just to follow up on what Donna asked, just to be sure that this is being implemented, well, with fidelity, I guess I would say, are you going to be comparing how the progress these kids are making with something like iReady or somehow? I mean, so we'll know whether we made the right decision here?
Yeah, certainly. So we'll continue to track our students' growth in reading using iReady as one of our measures that we're mandated to use through the READ Act, as well as whatever our state measures are. So, yeah, I think it's our expectation that we will see some improvements in those areas as we get some strong, consistent materials available for our teachers to be able to use.
Okay. And so just to follow up on Richard's question, Angel, so for our kids who are dyslexic that are Spanish speakers, are they going to get what they need?
We'll have both the foundations in English and Estrita in Spanish. So as the teachers are assessing to see what their students need, they'll be able to use either sets of those materials.
And is Estrita, is that similar to Foundations?
It would be comparable to foundations, yes.
Okay, so we'll be able to identify those kids and help them if they need that, okay.
Yes.
I guess that's it. Thank you. This was super helpful, and I can only imagine how much work you guys all went through to get to this place, because we were so far from it a year ago. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Sam?
Yeah, thanks. Process is really important, and I was, as Kathy pointed out, really heartened to see the 4s and 5s from the committee, that everybody believed in the process, thought it was transparent and thorough, and that's a credit to you. Thank you. Following up on what Shelley asked about how we'll know whether or not it's working, it's a 2-year rollout, right? So is it like 2021 at the earliest to know if this is working, or if we see things along the way, can we make adjustments? Could you say a little bit more about that?
So I think, of course, we'll be monitoring it closely throughout the entire implementation. It's hard to know how long it takes into an implementation to start to see the results show up. But it's something that we'll continue to monitor through the process. Certainly, I think by year 3, we would hope to see some really strong results. How long it takes to get some of that improvement, it's hard to say.
We've also, in part of the preparation for the implementation plan, we've reached out to teachers to ask them what they would see as a successful rollout. We've reached out to principals and in both the bilingual schools and the monolingual schools, and I believe gathering some qualitative data along the way will help us too to evaluate the effectiveness.
Thank you so much for your work. It was a great and informative report. I had a couple questions. So with this new adoption, if a teacher's been taking the Lucy Calkins writing, is that something that's just now we won't be supporting anymore in terms of PD, et cetera?
Well, for writing programs, so this does not include a formal writing program.
Oh, it doesn't, okay.
So
you can still do.
That would be a separate, I think that we hope to seek a common writing program that we would come to you with for a request for approval in years to come.
Okay.
And then for a child who is ELL but at a monolingual school such as Crestview, what would be their go-to reading program? It would be the Foundations and the Fontes Pinnell?
It would be.
Okay.
They would be involved in the whole group lessons, and then teachers will be able to adjust the small group lessons to meet their individual needs.
Okay. And then, do we currently have a literacy program at the preschool level? You mentioned that we would be putting this down into the preschool, and I was just curious what we're doing now.
We have creative curriculum in the preschool right now. We have connected with the preschool or the early childhood director, and she is excited about being able to use those materials and look alongside what we have for the foundations and the estrada, which is the phonics and phonological awareness component that will match nicely with the creative curriculum.
Okay. And just how much time do they spend on literacy in preschool out of their 2 hours and 45 minutes? I was just curious.
Right now, it varies across schools. That's something we can gather more information on, be more consistent.
Okay, and I'm sorry if I missed this. I think I did, but where do reading recovery and LLI fit into this picture?
Reading recovery and LLI are interventions for students that have not yet met grade level standards. So those will stay as interventions.
Okay.
And we'll also continue with the Barton intervention and the Orton-Gillingham interventions we've been increasing.
Okay, and so those are our 4 interventions?
Yes.
And then you'll have these, okay. All right, yeah, thank you so much. It was a great presentation.
Thank you.
And I appreciate all the staff coming. It was really helpful. Any other comments, or shall we vote? Okay, would you like to call the vote, Laura?
Benford,
Yes.
Fuqua.
Yes.
Garcia,
Yes.
Gebhardt. Marquis,
Yes.
Myers. Sergeant.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Okay, so our next item is committee appointments, and you received a handout. That's a draft handout. Does everyone have it in front of them? Okay. So we have had periodically requests from board members to know which committees are happening. I think Kathy made a request about a year ago, and it was a really long list of committees, and it was a hodgepodge of committees. So it included committees that come from board policy, committees from state statute, committees created by the board as resolutions, and then a lot of staff committees and also some informal community committees. And so Laura and I were going through the list, and it really came out of this DAC, the District Audit Committee issue. And we made a list of committees that at least had a direct board relationship or board opportunity to narrow it down a little bit. And the other thing I tried to do is capture committees that aren't written down anymore. And so the 2 examples, if you go down 3 lines down on the first page, are the 4 are the Athletic Review Committee and the District Indoor Air Quality Committee. So those committees don't exist anywhere except in a resolution by the time those are each passed. And we looked historically and wrote down those dates. And then we have committees like the Boulder City Liaison that Shelley and I have been doing for a while, the Legislative Liaison that's come and gone. And one thought I had, and then we have some board policy committees. We have 4 of those, and those are the Early Childhood Advisory Council. We have the Local Evaluation Council, which is Policy BDFA, the District Drug Abuse and Prevention Advisory Council, Policy BDFD, and the Career and Technical Advisory Council Committees, which is Policy BDFB. And you'll notice that in 3 of those, the committee members are appointed, 2 of those are actually appointed by the board. And I don't think we've done that action in the last 4 years that I've been on the board. So one thought I had as a starting place is, right now we can discuss if there's a committee. There's some committees that we've always had people on, and I thought maybe we could assign those people now, and then we can talk about the future of some of these committees. We still are going to need staff input on some of them. And then the final thing I thought about doing, and this is really a study item, but is to take the committees that we know are board appointed or that were even created by the board, such as the District indoor air, and the athletic review. And to make that list with the rules on the committee composition on it and who does the appointment as an exhibit for the board committee policy BD, which is its own board committee policy. And the reason there is so that no one ever has to do what Laura and I just did again, which is to go through all of these. And it's really it was really a pain. It was a lot more work than we thought. And you'll notice that, and we just found of another committee that's in state statute through DAC as a parent engagement committee that we need to understand if a board has a role in that or not. So what I would propose tonight is that we could talk about the committees that I have a lot of confidence in, which are the District Accountability Committee, the Boulder City Liaison, the Legislative Liaison, the Liaison to the City of Boulder, CU, and the county. And we can talk about the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee. And then I would come back to you with more information on some of the other committees, and possibly I'd really like to come up with a proposal to add this as an exhibit or a regulation to policy BD. So that's two questions. One is, would you all be ready to talk about some appointments to the committees that we've always traditionally had, not the new ones? And then would you be open to a discussion about modifying BD with a regulation that lists the committees where the board has an appointment role? So do we want to do a horseshoe, Shelley? Both, okay, Sam? Donna? Kathy?
I didn't hear the second one that you said.
To talk about people being on these committees that we're sure of right now, and then talking about the other committees at a later date, when we can flesh it out a little bit more.
Yes.
Okay? Okay, great. So for the first, then I'm just going to go through the ones that I feel a lot of confidence in right now. So the first would be the District Accountability Committee. We generally have had 1 to 2 board members on that committee. It's a non-voting member. And generally that role is mostly to present out to the DAC. And that's been served by Richard Garcia. So Richard, do you want to continue?
I would like to have somebody else take over. It's
Okay.
been 2 years for me now, so yeah.
Okay. All right, so is any other board member interested on the DAC? And that's your off Tuesday night, so, okay?
First meeting will be Tuesday.
Yeah.
Wait, they're off Tuesday nights?
No, it's our night that we don't meet, it's the one Tuesday.
I don't know if Kitty's actually experienced one of those yet, but, so,
Sometimes they meet when you're meeting. If you meet and then they meet. So there are times that it's a long night, just so you know. But it's a very nice group.
and you don't need to be there the whole time. The important is the beginning. The important part is the beginning so that you can give a report out.
And
So,
answer questions.
right, and so it's not, it doesn't have to be too onerous. So what interest, board members? Okay, Kitty, all right.
I was Richard's backup, I'd be happy to be your backup.
Okay.
Okay, is everyone okay with that? Terrific. Okay. So next we have the Boulder City Liaison. And so I wrote here board appointed, that's probably not even the right term, but, and this group gets together with the City of Boulder about City of Boulder issues. I've been on that committee for 2 years, and I actually would like to stay on that committee. Okay,
And I have a question.
Yes.
Can you post it so we can attend as interested board members, or?
I
They're
don't know.
public meetings, aren't they? I mean,
Yeah, they are public. I think they are public. Yeah, we could post
So I
that.
think if you could just post it so that.
Okay. Fair enough. Is everyone okay with that? Okay?
No, Tina and
Shelley.
Shelley, but just post it so other board members want to attend.
Does the city of Boulder post those? And does that
I think they
cover
do.
the, we would post it? Okay.
That's what I'm thinking, there's.
Yes.
There's 3 of them at that meeting.
It depends on where it is.
Well, this is a different meeting.
Oh,
Yep, this one you haven't been to yet.
I'm sorry.
That's
Okay.
We haven't had it for a while.
Okay, the next is a legislative liaison. This role didn't exist last year, but it exists the years prior. And that was sometimes someone who would give a legislative update and then also maybe ask for the board to let them testify on behalf of the board if they wanted, things like that. We don't have to have a legislative liaison, but if anyone is interested in that role. Okay, we have two interests. Shelley, do you have a comment?
I was just going to say that the reason that we talked about wanting one back after we lost one for a year, I think, was that there were things that BVSD was weighing in on down at the Capitol that the board didn't really know about. And so it was a way of understanding where the district stood on legislation as well as where the board stands. So I think it would be pretty important for whoever has this role to really go through the list of things that are, being considered by the legislature and bring those back to us to see if we have an opinion on those and make that really an active role, much more so than it was.
So my question is, what is the difference between what Ernestine and,
Tanya.
and Tanya do?
So they really report out to us, but they might, for instance, then contact Kitty or Kathy, let's say they were the legislative liaisons, and in a more efficient manner say, does the board want to discuss this? Do they want to bring it to the board table? I felt like when we had legislative liaisons, it was really helpful because they really had their eye on all the pieces of legislation coming up, and I thought it was great. So I personally would, that's why I put it on the list, so.
Donna, the relationship between us and the lobbyist would be that we would tell them what we want them to lobby for. Yeah.
And I already attend the CASB legislative meetings that happen every couple of weeks, and they have a very helpful bill tracker that we can follow, the bills that affect education. So that's actually a way to kind of, so you don't have to get overwhelmed by the amount of legislation, is to look at the bill tracker.
So I heard two, Kitty and Kathy. Anybody else? We had two in the past, so is everyone okay with two? Okay. Congratulations. Okay, the last is, the next one is, I'm not even sure if everyone is aware of this, but there's a quarterly meeting with the City of Boulder, CU, and Boulder County that the board president has traditionally attended, and I'm attending. And I'd like to continue to attend it. And it's really turned out in this to be more like every 6 months. And there's been different people there. Sam, do you want to talk a little bit more about what it was in your 2 years?
I never went to one.
Okay. Right.
Well, let me ask a question relating to the other ones as well. Is it open to the public to attend?
So I don't think so. So
Oh.
this one's not noticed. And it's, usually it's the mayor of Boulder who's invited, and they'll sometimes send a delegate. And for CU, they invite the chancellor. He has not shown up at the last 2 meetings. So instead it was, yeah, they're much less frequent than quarterly. So, so I would like to continue attending. I think it still makes sense for the board president. But I'm trying to figure out a way to be more transparent about it, because I think that a lot of people have interest in this type of meeting on the board. So I'm not sure if there's a way to share the agenda, or if an agenda came up and someone wanted to, take my place, I'm open to that if it was something really important. So yeah, so I was just trying to think of ways so that, because again, this is a committee that you wouldn't really know about. And for Sam, he never went in 2 years, and that's why I'm trying to write these down. It's okay. Oh, do you say it's all right?
Do you even know if they met that you didn't?
I think, they did meet a couple times, and they did distribute the agenda in advance. It just, you have to make choices in your schedule about what's really important in your board service, and that didn't seem particularly important to me. So
And I went in your stead.
that's right.
That's right. So I think that's why I've been twice, now that I'm thinking about it. Okay, great. And then, so we have the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee, which is a committee that was required by the ballot language when we passed the 2014 bond. And we've never had a board liaison to that committee, and Kathy requested about maybe 4 or 6 months ago to be able to attend those meetings, which are also posted, I think. So the question is, and the board does
appoint and I believe vote on the members of that committee. I think we did that recently. So the board member does not present out to the CBOC. The board member, I don't think, votes. Kathy, do you want to talk more about what your experience, how many meetings have you been to?
I've been to every CBOC meeting since I asked to attend, so I don't know, 3 or 4.
Okay.
And then I feel like it's helpful to report to the board what happens at the CBOC meetings, because CBOC only reports to us quarterly,
Okay.
and they meet every 2 months.
Okay. So I guess,
And I'd like to continue to attend.
that's probably a good thing to add. So is everyone okay with there being a CBOC liaison? No, it's not required.
Liaison just listens to what they're saying and comes back and reports, doesn't try and say what the board wants or doesn't want, or doesn't try to influence CBOC in any way, just
Oh.
reports back.
Yeah, I don't feel like I can speak on behalf of the board.
So is everyone okay with that? Okay. All right, so I'm going to skip the next one because that's one that I'm going to try to provide more information on. And that's not board appointed, so I don't think there's any sense of urgency. And then I believe, oops, I'm missing one. Oh, no, so let's go to the last page, which is the Superintendent's Budget Advisory Committee. Because this is a new committee, I think because we have the DAC providing us input on budget, and this committee was started by the superintendent, and really goes straight to the superintendent. I'm not feeling at this point in time that a board member should be attending this Budget Advisory Committee. It'd be an avenue without board, but we could ask that there be an annual report or something like that from the committee to the board. And we could suggest it, again, it's not our committee. Any thoughts about that committee? And you can think about it until next time, too, if you want to. That's an option, Kathy.
I don't think an annual report is really helpful. Maybe the superintendent could report on it as part of her comments at board meetings as to what's going on. That might be helpful.
That's a great idea. Any other thoughts about that committee?
I went to a couple of meetings of that committee, and that was when they were pretty well attended, and it was interesting. But I don't remember when I sat on the board ever knowing what was discussed in those meetings, so I think it would be helpful, actually. So if Cindy would be willing to report back, or whomever, I think that would be good, because they were interesting discussions.
Cindy, does that sound? That's great, okay. So I'm just going to make a note that will be something that the superintendent brings up in superintendent report, if that's okay with you. And we'll try this and see how it goes. I mean, this is a bit new. All right, and then we'll do the rest later, if that's okay with everybody. Okay. Okay, our next item are district goals. Cindy, do you want to tee this up a bit?
Nothing like starting district goals 2.5 hours into a board meeting. So I'm sure you're all just so excited to get to district goals. You do have a handout at your place. And what we did was, in thinking about good organizations, we know that good organizations have some broad-based goals. Now, goals don't tell you everything that everyone is doing. They obviously are not a total summary of the work occurring in the system. But what we have done is major parts of the organization have looked at what it is they strive for and where we want to go. So if you look at the academic goals, you'll see we want the achievement of all kids to improve, but we also want good assessments and good things for kids to work on. So there's a mixture of having the kids achieve, closing the achievement gap, and creating materials. You will look at the human resource goals in terms of what kind of an organization do we want? Who do we want working here, and how do we want to treat our employees? Our budget goals, I think, cover what you've already talked about today. So we have learning, we have human resources, we have budget. So these are broad-based. We wanted to bring them to you. We think that good organizations have goals. Happy to respond to any questions or to get folks to respond to questions.
Kathy?
And I forgot the bond program, which is critical. I apologize.
What I would like to see under teaching and learning is there's nothing in there that talks about the whole child and social emotional learning, which I think is an important goal for us. And given our focus on counselors and others, I think it would be good to talk about that. And I don't see anything about like overall, I don't know how you would measure it, but overall climate for teachers and the schools.
You're talking about a human resource issue, climate? I think we have a climate goal in human resources. See if that is it or if we need something different.
I was thinking more along student climate, but maybe we can see what you put around social
Okay.
emotional learning.
Student climate, okay.
So again, this is a study item with no finite time to vote, so we can take our time with this. Other questions and feedback or thoughts? Sam?
Just to support Kathy's comment about social emotional goal and
Got it.
school climate, and then it feels to me like there needs to be a community process around the goals. Are we essentially updating our 5-year goals? Is that what we're attempting to do here, or
Well,
are we getting away from 5-year goals?
so that's a great question.
We're
So
now at
when
year
we-
6 or 7, I think, of these.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I think when we met about developing budget priorities, we spoke a lot about how there was a disconnect between our thinking around budget priorities and our thinking around goals. And I think that an idea is at some point to try and bridge that divide for board members. So what we're doing here tonight is looking at a first set of goals that maybe will get us closer to a place.
Yeah, which makes absolute sense to me, and I support the process. I just putting in a statement that at some point we need to involve the broader community. This is primarily board and staff developed right at this point. And one of the things I appreciated about the process we went through in 2011, 2012 was that we did cast a wide net. And there's always ways we can improve that process, but our goals should be the community's goals.
Now, the difference might be that the goals that we adopted through that process, I think, are still in place. That was the vision, mission, and the goals were very high level.
Yes, they were.
So I think that I'm not hearing that we're actually suggesting changing those high-level goals. It's what falls below them.
They are all encompassing. So yes, we could hang anything underneath them. Yeah.
And I think it is a really good point. You do still have your vision, mission, really broad-based goals document. That document is unchanged. So this was, as we talked about budget, saying, is our budget connected with what we're doing day to day in our department? So these really are the goals that we're working towards. And I think your question around new 5 to 7 year goals is very relevant. I'm not sure right now is the time to do it. You probably want to wait. You're going through a superintendent hiring process. Get your new superintendent. What kind of a strategic plan are you going to create?
Yeah, and I agree with that, but I just want to, I think we should be thinking of this in terms of a larger process, a more inclusive, longer process.
Is to not do this now and do that whole community process, but Kitty?
No, I just wanted to make sure that once we get to the end of this process and we've adopted our goals, that we also know how we're going to achieve them, when we're going to achieve them, and how do we know we've achieved them? Because that's missing right now.
What other comments? Richard?
I'd like to see if we can add a major item, like you got teaching, learning, bond program, human resources, et cetera. could we add like a partnership, family, community engagement item on there as our Boulder Valley goals? And then you can put a sub-bullets in there in terms of what that means. And also on the human resources side, because we all know that recruiting highly qualified teachers and all of that, that we're kind of nearing a point where there's declining teachers that are declining individuals that want to go to schools of education, et cetera. So it's going to be tougher to recruit. So I'm thinking about, is it possible to add a grow your own program within that particular goal?
Let's give that some thought.
We can talk about that, because right now I know that you have pathways at Centaurus and at Boulder High. And that's what they're doing. They're actually growing future teachers, you know, so I think, and make a very conscious effort to make sure that happens.
Yeah, Shelley.
Cindy, can you just give us maybe a little background on why we're doing this, like now? Like,
Well, this really came about from your conversation, in that when you were talking about the budget, and there weren't really priorities that you saw. How is staff working to relate work of departments to our district budget? So we have multiple targets in the Unified Improvement Plan. We have lots of things that people are working on. So this is an effort to say, here are the big goals. We do believe they're connected to your budget priorities, and they're connected to the conversations you've been having. Your conversation tonight about being sure to add the whole child and social emotional learning and student climate, I think, are really relevant. And every good organization could point to a list of goals. So even if you said, we don't want these, I think this has been a good process for the staff to say, well, what are we working on? And how would we frame it? And how would we state it? So I think it's an important part of the process in continuous improvement. And I do think you'll probably launch into a new process with long-term goals. But you still need goals so people know where we're going.
I like that Tina said we've got time, because I do think that we will want to take that time, especially with our new leadership that we'll be hiring.
What other comments?
I just agree with Sam. I think if we're really going to do overarching goals like these, we should make this a community process.
Well, and I think I think that's a great point, and we should probably discuss as a board at some point whether we want to go into more detail than this in terms of the idea of the target metrics and our performance targets or something like that. Because we have vision, mission, and then we have high-level goals, then we had the 6 areas of the success effect, which this looks a little bit like.
Yeah.
And then we should probably go back to all that.
I think we should relook at all of it.
And say,
yeah.
what is it we want to do?
Yeah. Like, there's no assessment in here for reading. There's one for math and one for writing, but there's nothing in there. And yeah, I feel like it needs another look.
And we might want to try to get it done before next year's budget if we can, because I think it would be
That would be
helpful.
great. Yep.
Because I think that's what we're really trying to be responsive to, is that feeling of not being able to connect goals with the budget, so. Sam?
Yeah, and one value, I think, of the process, Shelley and I were on the board, was it also served to, in some ways, introduce the new superintendent to the community. So the timing is good there if you're talking about sort of summer, early fallish.
So so what I'm hearing is that maybe that we feel comfortable moving into the budget season with what we have now, and that we can delay this, and then assess the vision, the mission, and the goals, and then kind of decide what the detail level is on the goals. Does that sound good to everyone? Great. All right. Thank you for putting these together. It was a...
So I'm hearing you don't want them back. Okay, thank you.
Not yet.
Okay, the next was, we had spoken last meeting about the Modernized School Finance Act, or the Superintendent's Finance Formula. And I'm wondering if people have more questions about this, or have had more thoughts or feelings. Yep. Yes.
Sometimes you can let the perfect get in the way of the good, and that no matter what bill passes or doesn't pass, it's never going to be exactly what everybody wants. So I think we have to look at it from that kind of perspective of, is this going to be better than what we have? Is it good enough, or is it better enough from what we have now? And if it's not, who is going to be putting forth something that is better?
Okay. Other comments? Does someone have an update on where this is in the process? I do. Okay. Kathy, do you want to?
It's scheduled for hearing April 2nd. That's the update. And the question I have is, well, there's two things. One is that the ballot measure actually has an allocation. It's not a formula, it's not a school finance formula, but if this doesn't pass, the ballot measure actually has allocation addressed in it. And the question I have is, if lightning strikes and the ballot measure passes, the legislature, what's to stop them from coming back in and redoing this all over again? So I'm just wondering, and I don't know if Bill has an answer to that or anybody has an answer to that. I don't think we do, but it seems like it would be too much to resist if there was money for them to not want to come back in and redo this all over again. And so I just wonder, it's not that I don't want to support it, but I just wonder how much we want to push this, because there already is an allocation in the ballot measure, and it seems like the legislature would want to revisit this and do their own. Might not look different from this, but it's just, it was a question that came up when we were talking about it at the, with Case Casby and CEA. I don't know. Get your crystal ball out, Bill?
So my opinion is that the effort that has gone into design a formula that is based on some recommendations from experts in the field around education, with what it takes to educate students, what it takes to meet the current state requirements, graduation requirements. It's not all the way there, but it's a step in the right direction. It's a much simpler, if you look at the formulas that's behind some of it, might not feel simpler, but it's a little bit more straightforward formula when it comes to counting a student and knowing what the allocation is relative to that student for funding. The ballot language, the language that's in there that allocates the dollars, is pretty high level, just because it kind of needs to be in ballot language. And although helpful, step in the right direction, funding things like full-day kindergarten and preschool doesn't get to that level of specificity that that this Finance Act provides. The legislature certainly could come back after the fact if they pass this one, or if they don't pass this one, and put something in. I would suggest that it would have a hard time getting very far without a lot of support behind it, like this one particularly has in the education community. So that's my thoughts on it.
Okay. Donna?
I don't really have a question for you, Bill. I'm just, after reading the Daily Camera article from Dr. Haddad, I had some similar thoughts as his. And first look and glance at this, it looks wonderful, and I like the way students that are low achievers, free and reduced lunch, are supported better. But I spent 30 minutes with him on the phone today, kind of discussing why he wasn't supporting it. And he did not feel, and I share the same thoughts of going to the community again after we've already asked for lots of funding, that the clarity wasn't here in this bill. And I realize, Kitty, it's not perfect, and I'm not looking for perfect. I'm just looking for more assurance that we're not just generalizing, saying, well, we might consider doing this and that. And what's to keep them from getting this 1.7 billion and not using it to backfill para, for example? There's not the intended promises are there, but they're not concrete.
I think it's a fair question. The thing that I would point out to you is that there are 178 superintendents in Colorado. 171 of them have signed on to this. Don has not, you're right, and he has some very specific things about what he wants, which is different than 171 other superintendents have wanted. And this has not only to do with the funding, but it has to do with the way we're looking at our children and funding children appropriately. So I just want to point that out, because I understand where Don is, and I understand what he has said, but I think it's really important to remember 171 school districts are saying we need to change school funding in Colorado. And one of the things this bill does is it looks at each and every child and says, what are the needs of that child compared to another child, and how do we look at funding through that lens? So if you don't want to pass a resolution, we're fine with that. It's not that huge of an issue. But I think it's really important to remember that 171 superintendents have said this is a really important step.
And I did ask him that question specifically, and he answered me in saying that 4 of the big districts, the superintendents are leaving or retiring, and that with Amendment 66, it was also, this is just his comment to me, was that many people were on board with it until it didn't pass, and then they said, well, we realize why, and we should have taken a more intense look at it. That was just, I asked the question and he answered.
Well, you and I should have a conversation about that. But what I will say is that this is not Amendment 66. Amendment 66 had some incredibly complex ballot language, and I think a lot of superintendents were very concerned about trying to pass Amendment 66 when people had such a hard time understanding what it was going to do to school funding. This school funding formula, I don't think it's the perfect formula either, but the huge thing that it does is it looks at children and says different children need to be funded differently. And that's a huge step in Colorado. So it really will look at school districts and say, what's your population and what are the kinds of services that have to be provided for these children? So again, if you decide not to pass this, I will tell you that I get lots of calls saying, what's your board doing? You are considered a board that sets a standard for other boards in the state. And I have had other superintendents say, what your board does is really influential. So just so you know, if you choose not to, it's really okay. But what I would stress is that I think this is the right step in school funding.
Okay.
I'm looking at.
Go ahead, Richard.
I'm looking at the resolution, and there's nothing in the whereases that I personally would be against. I support every one of them. I would be hard-pressed to answer to my community why I didn't vote for a resolution that talks about proper resources are required to close achievement opportunity gaps, and also talk about equity and all of that wonderful stuff. So knowing that this probably has a chance like a snowball would have in where, okay? But I personally would not be able to vote against it.
I think where we get confused is the superintendents have been trying to walk this line that we're not talking about taxes, we're just talking about a formula. And you can't talk about, in my opinion, you can't talk about one without the other. And we even mix it up in our resolution. Because in our resolution, we say proper resources are required, so we're talking resources in a resolution that's just supposed to talk about a formula. So, and to your point, Don, I think they've really tried to deal with the maintenance of efforts so that they can't take this new money and just use it to do what they're already, and supplant what they're already doing. So there is language in there to try to help that. There's always unintended consequences and loopholes that even the brightest people who tried to put this together haven't thought of, but they did try to forward think that issue. So I just think that's our issue when we're trying to deal with this, is trying to separate out what the superintendents are doing just with the formula and the whole tax measure and the ballot measure, and I just think it gets all convoluted, and that's why we struggle with it.
And Kathy, I think that's a really important point. And Great Education Colorado is starting its petition drives, and they do plan to put a ballot initiative on. And you're right. I mean, we are fully aware that this can't be funded without a ballot initiative. But Great Education Colorado is taking on the ballot initiative. Petitions will be available, I think, starting next week. They're already available. Thank you. That's right. You had one, didn't you? Yes. Yes, thank you. So it is a movement, and you're influential in the state. That's your blessing and your curse at this moment.
Shelley?
Yeah. So when Amendment 66 was up, this board voted against it, and the state voted against it. And it turned out that afterwards, just like what Don Haddad said, lots of people said it wasn't a good bill. And it was after the fact that they agreed with the board. It wasn't like we were following anyone on that one. We thought long and hard about it, and we made a good decision as it turned out. And so what I'd like to say to you, Richard, is I totally agree with you that there's nothing to disagree with in this resolution in principle, but the language doesn't guarantee that any of that's going to happen, as far as I can tell when I look at it. And I think that this is just a real case of the devil being in the details. I mean, I look at this and I don't see any guarantee on adequacy. I don't even see them defining that. It says that it will provide for a base amount of pupil funding that's closer to adequate. I mean, that kind of language is all throughout this bill. What does closer to adequate mean? I don't even know how that gets in a bill, that lack of specificity. And then it says that the General Assembly shall annually increase the statewide base per pupil funding over the amount established for the preceding budget year by at least the rate of inflation. But that's the only guarantee I see in here, and the state still determines what the statewide base per pupil funding is. And there's no language in here that says they have to spend this money even on education. I mean, we could vote to put all this money in the pool, and then they could use it for whatever they want. It's not specified in this bill that they use it for that. So I don't know what adequate means. I don't know what increased means. I don't know what, when it says negative factor will not be applied to the formula, what does that mean? Because could there be a negative factor that comes after the formula that could be applied? So I'm confused about that. And then I'm not sure whether 279 million that we're talking about that BVSD would get, is that just our projection? Like a desire of the Colorado school superintendents that each district gets the amount that they're saying that they're going to get? Because I don't see that in the formula. And then it goes on and says that the formula contemplates universal quality preschool and contemplates reserving special education categorical program funding for reimbursement grants. That's not a guarantee to say that you contemplate something. So I don't understand how we can go to taxpayers and say, yeah, we want all this money from you, and we're contemplating universal preschool, and we're contemplating special ed. Like, how is that going to convince anyone to, I think this is going to go down, just like we thought Amendment 66 will go down.
Do you want to go ahead, Kathy? Because I believe that 4-year-olds, I believe, Bill, 4-year-olds will be funded differently. So that's, Shelley, the 4-year-olds will be funded differently. All of the students will be funded differently. So I don't know, I can't comment on contemplates, but I do know 4-year-olds are going to be funded differently.
That's what it says.
Sorry, Kathy.
Well, I just think that we're going to need to have a discussion about the ballot measure when we're ready to have that conversation. So maybe if we clean this up to make it just clear that it's just the funding formula and doesn't have this conversation in here about adequacy or all of that, and we were just supporting just the formula without having to have, it's really hard, I know, to have the conversation without the money piece, but that's what they're trying to do and that's what they're asking.
But I'm not sure what the formula is, Kathy. It's like plus something adequate plus inflation. Like what you got this year plus inflation, and hopefully that'll be adequate, is kind of what it says for the formula, as far as I can tell.
Well, maybe what we need is a more detailed presentation on what the actual bill and the language is, because that might be helpful. Well, Bill could probably do it in his sleep, would be my guess, but, and probably does it in his sleep. But so to your point, Shelley, maybe if we just had more specific to look at just what the superintendent's proposal is, because we're going to have to talk about the ballot measure. I think, not have to, but I think we're going to want to talk about the ballot measure at some point. And so I'm just trying to keep it clean because they get mushed, and I don't know if that's helpful at all. It might not be helpful at all.
Well, I feel like we need to understand we need to understand the formula before we vote for a resolution for it, for sure. Yeah.
If we could have more detail about the formula,
think that
and
would be
then
helpful.
try to keep in our minds the ballot measure for a later conversation. And just have more detail about, to answer your question, Shelley, around the formula. That's all I'm thinking might be helpful. Does that make sense?
So what I'm hearing is that this resolution is a little bit premature right now?
I don't know that it's premature, I just think we need more detail to understand what it is we're trying to vote on.
Or is it congruent with whatever the bill's going to do? What I'm hearing from you and what I'm reading here is like they're not.
Yeah, we're resolving to do something that the state's not resolving to do, as far as I can tell, which is fine. We can resolve all we want, but I don't think that's.
Yeah, so that goes to my question then. What's it going to hurt to go ahead and do the resolution anyway?
Well, if it says we're supporting this finance formula, I think that causes harm, because I'm not sure everyone sitting at this table does support it, because we don't have the detail we need to support it.
One thing that might be helpful when we, if the staff is able to create some more detail around the formula, is to compare it to our current model and the current guarantees that we have, which are very few. So I think it's important to remember that adequate is used too much already in 33, but there are certain things that we're probably not going to see that language change in our lifetime, just because budgets go up and down. So I just would like that when we do discuss it in the details to show how it'd be different than today in terms of the spirit of the language, if that's possible. What other comments? So do we want to do this again? Should we look at this again with more detail so we understand it more deeply? And would our legislative liaisons want to offer advice to change the resolution so that it more closely mirrors just the formula piece rather than the resources piece?
Well, I think let me make sure I understand, because the reason for this resolution is that you're supporting the bill, not that you're supporting a campaign or an election. So you want more clarity on the bill, and I know the superintendents have a slide deck out there that Bill can revise, and I've seen their slide deck twice, and it's very clear. It's very clear about the additional dollars and the money per child. So I would think Bill can do an even better job than the state superintendents. I have no doubt.
What was it?
A couple of things to contemplate.
No pun intended.
Right. that there is some, I wouldn't call it urgency, but there's one board meeting in March, and then spring break, and then in April, and then there is some point at which it's irrelevant if this isn't something that our lobbyists can use and share and talk amongst CASB board members and all that, get the word out that there is some level of support out there. Not suggesting it has to happen, but that there is some timing that matters in this. The RFI that was submitted that had some details in it, so that wasn't enough details, I guess, so we'll try again. The formula, we can certainly go through the math. It's pretty straightforward of you count kids and then you add a weight for a special ed student and you add a weight for a student in poverty, which is identified as free or reduced lunch. Then you add a weight for a second language learner. You add a size adjustment for the district, and that's the formula. That's where it's simpler than the current formula that has the cost of living, the cost of living is in there as well, but some cost of living and personnel concepts. So we can certainly sort of walk through the math. If it's possible to do that at a work session or lunch and learn type of thing, so we're not potentially dragging it out into April, that might be helpful from a timing standpoint, and being able to have more dialogue. We can get Tracy Rainey from the School Finance Project, who was very involved in this whole process. Justin Silverstein from APA, the consulting firm who does this across the country, who helped put this together to explain more of the details that, how it was put together and the conversations that happened around that, if that's helpful.
But, I mean, Bill, would you agree it doesn't define adequate funding?
So to get to the national average is more than what is proposed. So it's more than 1.6 or 7 billion. So the conversations around how much do you put this thing together for became a real part of the conversation with the superintendents to say, we want to be average, average funding across the country. Is that adequate? Not sure anybody would argue that what we have right now in Colorado is adequate funding. So there is the research that the School Finance Project did around the professional judgment panels to pull together what it takes to educate students to meet the graduation requirements, and that was built into the formula as to what it takes to do it. So adequate is not a defined amount because perhaps because it might be such a big number that it's really unattainable.
But, I mean, it seems to me if we're going to do this right, we should insist on adequate funding. And instead of passing a resolution supporting something that doesn't guarantee us that, we should be telling our lobbyists to go and write an amendment that will strengthen this bill. And that's the instructions we should be giving out of Boulder Valley School District, that this isn't it yet. I mean, that's where I am on it.
Yeah, I would really like if we could get a presentation so we can really get an in-depth understanding of this so that we can vote yay or nay before it's heard on April 2nd. Because like you said, if we wait too long, it won't matter what we do.
I like the funding formula. I like that everybody would be getting more, but 1.7 billion is a lot of money to yet put out there and go again, ask taxpayers. I know it's after this, then the taxpayer part comes in, but I just feel the clarity's not there, and the more I looked at it and talked today on the phone with the St. Vrain, Dr. Haddad, it reinforced my initial feeling. I want to back up a little. My initial feeling was, oh, this is great, we're going to get more money, and all the students are going to be funded appropriately. Then the more I delved into this, I thought, there's no guarantee. There's more money, but where is that money going, and are we really going to get it?
Yes, we would. Boulder Valley would have an increase. Would Boulder Valley have as large an increase as some other systems? Maybe not. But that's dependent on the children that you serve. So, yes, Boulder Valley would have an increase. Let us pull out the deck, that the slide deck that the superintendents have used. Bill and I will talk.
The other piece, I think that's how this is vastly different from the Amendment 66 piece, is the prescriptiveness to which you have to spend the money. So this is very much about funding a school district for the students they have and the characteristics of the school district. So it is up to the school board to decide how to spend that money. So it'll be an epic failure to have the state define how you should spend this money locally, which is kind of what 66 did with all the phys ed and art teachers we were going to get back, if we remember the advertisements on TV correctly. So this is very much about saying this is more money into the system. Over the past decade almost, you have made reductions in your system based on the circumstances you had. So here is money to put back in your system as you see fit in your local district. It is not here's what we think every school district should do across the state. And that's why this one is very different from previously. So it's up to the district to define what to do with those resources coming in.
So, Bill, who actually defines the base PPR rate? in this?
It's in the ballot, I believe. It resets the base amount in the ballot language, and then that is from where it starts growing by inflation every year. It's similar to Amendment 23 in that standpoint.
Which we've ignored.
Which is why I think they put the piece in there about, and no negative factor.
Can I ask a question? If this were to pass with the tax, could they then take money out of the current general fund that would have gone for education and backfill that into other spending uses such as transportation?
It has supplement, not supplant language in the ballot.
How strict is it?
It puts it in that puts the money in a separate fund and then says supplement, not supplant. So indicates to me that whatever money you're putting in right now, this adds to that. You can't take that away and have this be the new dollars.
And then in an environment of a recession, though, there's still flexibility to move money.
And that there is the ability to modify some of the statutory pieces that are in that as well. So I think that's a contemplated component of this. Did I just do that again?
Yep.
That the state needs to deal with the financial situations that they are faced with in any particular year within the constraints of Tabor, because this doesn't make Tabor go away either. It is an additional revenue stream for dollars outside that. But it doesn't lock the state into where K-12 couldn't be affected down the road if there was some loss of general fund revenue.
Which happened anyway 8 years ago, right?
Right.
I mean, and the one thing I go to kind of a dark place a lot with school funding is that there haven't been many scenarios, including Amendment 66, where we came out neutral. We didn't come out ahead in 66, we were flat. And I think, I haven't seen a lot of options where BVSD actually gets more money, that it's contemplated, that we get more money. Generally, it's talking about how do we equalize our mill levy, or how do we take away, and I tend to be supportive of this because for our district, it puts us ahead, and I just don't know how often that's going to come along for us. So that's something I'm thinking about as I consider this resolution. I'm tending to be supportive since it seems to benefit BVSD, but also have an underlying piece around equity that I think is important. So, but with that being said, I'm happy to have another time to look at the details. But this is something I'm probably more enthusiastic about than I have been other funding ideas I've seen, so, yeah, Shelley.
But we won't really know till we see the ballot language. So I don't know how we can support a resolution until we see the ballot.
Ballot language is out, so we could include that in the presentation. So.
I had it with me the other day.
And I think we should look at it.
Yep.
Yeah.
But at the
Sam?
same time or separate?
Same time. We don't have a lot of time, I think.
Well, not on the resolution, but on the ballot language, we have a lot of time.
Ooh,
Oh,
right,
okay.
right.
But I think to Shelley's point, we would need to understand the ballot language while considering the formula, or the resolution on the formula. Does that make sense?
Bill, can you comment on that? I'm not sure. I mean, the formula is one thing. That's legislative. The ballot initiative is a popular vote. So I think you could understand the formula without understanding the ballot language, although I'm certainly fine with understanding the ballot language. The formula cannot be implemented unless the ballot passes, but the formula could pass before we ever go for an election. I think I've got that right.
Correct.
Yes.
They are completely independent but work very well together.
Yes.
Other comments?
One comment on it that I really liked is that it had gifted and talented as, whatever they call it, where you get the extra money.
The weight.
Yeah, as a category, because, I don't think we do enough for gifted and talented, so getting funding based on that would be good for us.
So what I'm hearing now is that we would have a more detailed learning opportunity between now and the next board meeting. And it could be a lunch and learn, because we may not have enough board time to pull it off, since we only have one board meeting. So what are people's thoughts around that? Or we could try to schedule a work session that's not on a Tuesday. Next Tuesday is caucuses, so I don't think the board will be able to meet. Any thoughts, Richard? No?
Lunch and learn, I think, is a good option.
You want to do a lunch and learn? Okay.
Yeah, lunch and learn is fine. Is it to understand both the formula and the ballot language better, but is that going to change anyone's mind on, that's sort of what I'm wondering.
Well, I think it will serve to educate us better. Because I
Yeah,
think
it
that's
will do that,
what I
yeah.
hear asking for, is that we want to understand it better.
Okay.
I'd really like to know in actual dollars how much BVSD is going to get from this. That's really what I want to know. And how prescriptive is it and how we spend it.
Can we do that as an RFI?
However we want. That'd be easier for me than a lunch and learn. That's really what I want to know.
Okay. So are other people interested in a lunch and learn, or you are, Richard?
I'm going to Great Ed, Colorado tomorrow, so I'll probably.
You'll probably lunch and learn a lot there, okay? So let's try to figure that out, and then Shelley, can you submit an RFI?
Sure.
Okay.
I believe Ledge Council has put together the official projections on this. There's new calculations and new numbers of students that haven't been included in a Finance Act before, so there were some estimates that they've had to create based on how many preschool kids would there be in the system, because Legislative Council, yeah. They do the official fiscal note on anything that comes forward, and that's done now.
So is this in the slideshow, is the 279.8 million, is that Ledge Council's estimate?
No,
Is
that
your
was an estimate that was done by APA when they put together the formula based on those estimates of numbers that are not hard data out there right now. So it's close. It'll be close to whatever Ledge Council comes up with.
All right. Is everyone okay to move on to the next item? Okay. So just send in an RFI if you have another question. All right, the next item is a study proposed revisions to Board Policy IFF. Melissa Barber is joining us.
Okay, so the board had requested to look at this policy. So Community Montessori had used this process set out in this policy last fall to bring forward their proposal. I worked with Sandy and Mark, and we took a look at this policy. I think DAC had some feedback for the board as well, and as well as the principal of Community Montessori. And so I would put the changes that are proposed in kind of two categories. One relates to, on that first page, the idea that any kind of focus school proposal should come from within the school as opposed to from an outside group trying to change an existing school. Our thoughts around that were, we have our charter school policy that would be for outside groups if they want to propose a new school. So that is one substantive change. Really the rest of the redlining is around process. And it looks like a lot of redlining, but it was convoluted, and that was part of the difficulty, I think, for DAC and for the school itself. We had a separate section for timelines and process, so we've collapsed those together and tried to make it a little more clear in terms of how the DAC participates, how staff participates, and more clear timelines. One of the challenges had been the previous dates didn't align with the open enrollment window, so it pushed things out too far in the fall. So we were bumping up against, if we are going to approve a focus school, then the board would want to do that before the open enrollment window opens. So the timeline for proposing a focus school would be the window of August 1st to August 10th. Then we would have time for DAC and staff to prepare reports for the board's consideration and the superintendent recommendation that goes to the board. What else? Essentially, that's it. Some language cleanup. If you have any questions or suggestions, Richard?
Just a question on the Charter School Act. Doesn't the Charter School Act allow an existing school, if they have a certain percentage, to turn that into a charter school if they want to do that?
That's a good question that I don't
I
know
think
the
it
answer
does.
to. I don't know that that's addressed in the. I mean,
It's
that
in
would
the
be-
chart, yeah, unless they changed it, but I know
Yeah.
originally it's in the original Charter School Act. Where an existing school, if they want to change it to a charter school, they have to have like about 75% of the parents agreeing as well as the staff.
Let's do some checking.
Okay. Other thoughts or questions? Shelley?
Melissa, I missed it. What did you say about how this impacts charters?
It's a separate process, so we have our charter school application process that's set out in LBD, I think. So this is a process just for existing schools that
Focus
are
group.
non-charters
Yeah, okay.
to make a proposal for a focus.
Okay.
So it's an internal process.
Yep, Kitty?
What's the difference between a strand and focus?
I'm going to turn to these folks. We've had, over the years, different ways of things coming through.
So many years ago, several of our schools had a strand, for instance, of core knowledge. So at Superior Elementary, we had a strand, or meaning one classroom of each grade level all the way through, along with the regular BVSD curriculum. So part of the school did core knowledge, part of the school was BVSD curriculum. That's what a strand is. We haven't had one around for a long time.
Thanks. Other questions? Will this be on action next meeting? Is that the idea?
If that's what you,
Okay.
you all would like.
Yeah. Do you think we should run this by DAC?
We can certainly bring this to DAC's attention.
Yeah. Do you want to do that? What's on their agenda next Tuesday?
Either take it to DAC
Well, it depends what's on their agenda. I'll tell you what, why don't we ask DAC if they want to look at it? They already gave us feedback because they did the community Montessori, so they may not need to look at this. I think their only concern was whether we could clarify it, so it may not. Let's see what they have to say. So if it doesn't need to go to DAC, or if it does, I'll let you, well, wait, you're not the DAC rep anymore. I was just gonna say.
And there's not any particular urgency, you know, the application request period would start August 1st, so if we need to push the action to allow the DAC at least to look at it, we can do that.
Great. Okay. So if there are no other questions, shall we go to agenda setting? Okay. I'll actually start with an item. If we're going to have a request for security cameras, whether they're through CBOC or through the general fund, I would like us to be able to schedule a meeting before any vote is requested so that the board has time to discuss.
Do you want that to be two separate board meetings, or do you want a work session and a board meeting, or what? How would you like that?
The format, I don't think matters unless
Okay.
it matters to someone else, but before the vote is asked of the
Okay.
board, I would like the board to
Okay.
know, to have a,
So two separate meetings?
Yes.
Okay.
And is the vote for funding? Or is the vote for, in principle, we'll do this? Or is the vote to change the policy that
and
says we
actually-
can't? Or,
and so the second is around the policy.
okay.
Even though it's a regulation of ECA, I just want to make sure that that's a discussion before the vote, the board is asked to review it. Because it's a little different than the policy process. And then this is just a reminder, and everyone's doing great, but the more we can do questions as RFIs, the more that guarantees that they'll go on to our public library, so we can then refer to them to the public. So again, if you're about to write a question to an email, and if there's a way, sometimes it doesn't make sense, but if there's a way to make it into an RFI, it's great because then it becomes public, and then it's searchable by other board members rather than trying to go through email and through transitions of the board. So that was just one thing I wanted to say in general. Okay, other agenda items. All right, then this is adjourned.